Their teeth could bite through armor. They did not ask for help. They took what they wanted. "Permission granted to send one shuttle," Jake said. "No weapons." An hour later, Commander Zektar stood in the colony's main meeting room. The alien warrior was even bigger than Jake expected. His fur was black with silver stripes. His wings were folded tight against his back. Scars covered his arms and face. But something was wrong. The great warrior's yellow eyes looked desperate. Dr. Lisa Chen, the colony's doctor and scientist, sat across from Zektar. She had studied alien species for 20 years. "Commander, you look sick. Are you well?" Zektar's claws scratched the metal table. "My people are dying. All of us. The adults, anyway." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "A sickness came to our world 6 months ago. It only kills those who have reached full growth. The young ones are safe, but they cannot survive alone." Zektar's voice became quieter. "In my culture, cubs learn to fight from the moment they can walk. The weak ones die, the strong ones live. That is our way." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "But now the adults are gone?" "Not yet, but soon. We have perhaps 1 year left, maybe less." Zektar stood and began to pace. His claws clicked on the floor. "We are searching the deep void for a cure, but we cannot take the cubs with us. The journey is too dangerous. They are too young." Jake began to understand. "You want us to watch your children. Your species does something no other species does. You keep your weak young alive. You care for them until they grow strong. We have watched your colonies. Human parents will die to protect cubs that are not even their own blood." Dr. A. Chen nodded slowly. "That's true. But your cubs are not human cubs. We don't know how to care for them. They need food, warmth, and safety. Nothing more." Zektar's ears flattened against his head. "I know what you are thinking. Kethmori are killers. Our cubs will grow up to be killers too. But dead cubs grow up to be nothing." Jake looked around the room at his staff. Colony Director Helen Brooks had been quiet until now. "How many cubs are we talking about?" 200. The number hung in the air like a weight. The human colony had only 3,000 people. 200 alien predator cubs would change everything. "They're babies now," Zektar continued. "Their eyes are not even open yet. They cannot hunt. They cannot fight. They will die without help." Dr. Chen asked the question everyone was thinking. "What happens when you come back? What if your cubs have learned human ways instead of Kethmori ways?" Zektar's eyes grew hard. "Then we will fix them. But first they must live." Jake stepped outside the meeting room to think. Through the window he could see the Kethmori ship hanging in space like a dark moon. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth. He thought about the children in the colony schools. He thought about what it meant to be human. When he returned to the room, Jake's mind was made up. "We'll do it, but we have conditions." "Name them." "First, your cubs live with our families. They don't get put in some special facility. They become part of our community. Second, we raise them our way. If you want them to learn human caring, they have to be treated like human children." Zektar's claws extended slightly. "And third, when you come back, you don't just take them. If they want to stay, if they've made lives here, we talk about it." The alien commander was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "Agreed. When can you take them?" "Give us 3 days to prepare." 2 days later, families across New Denver Colony were getting ready for something that had never happened before. John and Maria Parker cleared out their spare room for their new alien child. Steve and Janet Cooper bought extra food and baby supplies. The Rodriguez family set up a special sleeping area with thick blankets and heat lamps. Dr. Chen worked day and night to understand Kethmori biology. The cubs needed milk every 2 hours. They grew fast. They would weigh 50 pounds within a month. Their claws and teeth were sharp even as babies, but they were still babies. They needed love and care just like human children. On the third day, the Kethmori shuttle landed. Zektar himself carried the first cub off the ship. The little creature was covered in soft gray fur. Its eyes were closed. It made small mewing sounds like a kitten, if kittens were the size of large dogs. Jake watched as Maria Parker took the cub into her arms. She looked down at the alien baby and smiled. "Hello, little one. I think we'll call you Alex." One by one, 200 Kethmori cubs found new homes with human families. They had no idea that they were about to become something new in the galaxy, something that had never existed before. As the Kethmori fleet prepared to leave for the deep void, Zektar stood with Jake at the landing pad. "Take care of them," the alien commander said. "We will," Jake promised. "That's what humans do." The alien ships disappeared into space, leaving behind a colony full of families who had just doubled in size. The cubs slept peacefully in their new homes, unaware that they were the beginning of something that would change both their species and the galaxy itself. 5 years had passed since the Kethmori fleet disappeared into deep space. Alex Parker stood on the school playground, watching a group of human children argue about the rules of their game. At 10 years old, he was already 6 feet tall with silver-gray fur and yellow eyes. His adoptive parents had given him a human name, but there was no hiding what he was. "Hey, Alex, can you reach that ball?" called Sophie Parker, his human sister. The ball had gotten stuck in a tree 20 feet up. Without thinking, Alex crouched down and leaped. His powerful legs launched him up to the branch where he grabbed the ball with one clawed hand. He dropped back down and handed it to Sophie with a gentle smile. "Thanks, big brother," Sophie said. The other kids gathered around Alex, not afraid but amazed. This was normal for them. Alex had been part of their school since he could walk. Across the playground, Luna Cooper was helping a human boy who had fallen off the monkey bars. At 9 years old, she was as big as Alex, but moved with careful grace. Her fur was pure white with black spots. She used her claws to carefully cut away the torn fabric of the boy's shirt so she could see his scraped arm better. "Mrs. Patterson," Luna called to the teacher, "Danny needs the first aid kit." Mrs. Patterson hurried over with medical supplies. She watched as Luna held Danny's hand while the teacher cleaned the wound. The Kethmori cub spoke in soft, comforting words until Danny stopped crying. "You're getting very good at helping others," Mrs. Patterson told Luna. "Dad says that's what families do," Luna replied. "We take care of each other." In another part of the colony, Max Rodriguez was working in his family's garden. His adoptive father, Carlos, had taught him how to grow vegetables. Max's claws, which could cut through metal, were perfect for digging in hard soil, but he had learned to be gentle with the delicate plants. "Careful with the tomatoes, son," Carlos said. "They bruise easy." Max nodded and used just the tips of his claws to pick the ripe fruit. His massive hands moved with surprising care. "Like this, Papa?" "Perfect. You've got the gentlest touch of anyone in the colony." Dr. Lisa Chen watched all of this from her research station. She had been studying the cubs since they arrived. What she found amazed her every day. Brain scans showed that the cubs' minds had developed in ways that were impossible for normal Kethmori. The parts of their brains that controlled empathy and social bonding had grown much larger than expected. The areas that managed aggression and dominance behavior had stayed small. These cubs thought differently than any Kethmori who had ever lived. "It's remarkable," Dr. Chen told Colony Director Helen Brooks during their weekly meeting. "They retain all their natural physical abilities. Alex can jump 40 feet. Luna can run 60 miles per hour. Max can lift a ton. But they use these abilities to help rather than to dominate." "What do you think will happen when their birth parents return?" Helen asked. Dr. Chen looked out the window where she could see Diana Foster teaching a group of younger children how to play a human game called tag. Diana was the largest of the cubs, already 7 feet tall with dark red fur. But she moved slowly and carefully so the smaller human children could keep up. "I don't know," Dr. Chen admitted. "These cubs have become something new. They're still Keth Mori, but they're also human in the ways that matter most." That evening, the Parker family sat down for dinner. Alex helped Maria Parker carry the heavy dishes from the kitchen. John Parker served the food while Sophie set the table. It was a normal family dinner except for the fact that one family member could probably tear the house apart with his bare hands. "Alex, how was school today?" Maria asked. "Good. We started learning about galactic history. Did you know that most alien species don't have families like humans do?" Alex cut his meat carefully with his claws. He had learned long ago to be gentle with everything around him. "Really? How do they raise their children?" John asked. "Most species just lay eggs and leave them. Some have group nurseries where all the young are raised together. Keth Mori have something called combat creches, where cubs fight each other until only the strongest survive." Sophie made a disgusted face. "That's horrible. What if a cub is sick or gets hurt?" "Then it dies," Alex said quietly. "That's the Keth Mori way. Only the strong deserve to live." Maria reached over and put her hand on Alex's arm. "That's not our way." "I know, Mom. I'm glad I'm here with you instead." John looked at his adopted son. "Alex, do you ever think about your birth parents? Do you wonder what it would be like to live with them?" Alex was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, but this is my family. You're my parents. Sophie is my sister. I don't know what those other Keth Mori are like, but I know who I am." Similar conversations were happening in homes across the colony. The cubs had grown up thinking of themselves as part of human families. They had human values, human emotions, and human ways of solving problems, but they also had claws, fangs, and the strength to crush steel. Luna Cooper sat with her adoptive parents, Steve and Janet, on their front porch, watching the sunset. "Mom, what's going to happen when my birth species comes back?" Janet Cooper had been dreading this question for years. "I don't know, sweetheart. But whatever happens, you'll always be our daughter. What if they want me to be different? What if they want me to be mean like regular Keth Mori?" Steve Cooper put his arm around Luna. "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what families do." The cubs had no memory of their birth parents. To them, the humans who raised them were their real families. They had learned human games, human songs, and human ways of caring for each other. They said please and thank you. They helped with chores. They worried about their friends and protected those who were smaller or weaker. But they were still Keth Mori. Their senses were incredibly sharp. They could see in the dark, hear sounds from miles away, and smell things humans could never detect. Their bodies were built for war, even if their minds had been shaped for peace. Late at night, Dr. Chen often walked through the colony and listened to the cubs sleeping. They made the same small sounds that human children made when they dreamed, but sometimes, very rarely, she heard other sounds. Deep growls and hunting calls that reminded her these were not human children. They were predators who had learned to love. The question that kept her awake was simple. What would happen when their birth parents returned to claim them? The cubs had become something unique in the galaxy. They were warriors with human hearts. But would the Keth Mori see that as an improvement or as a corruption of everything they believed in? As the 5th year ended with no sign of the returning fleet, the cubs continued to grow and learn. They were becoming teenagers now, with all the challenges that brought. But they faced those challenges the human way, with support from their families and community. None of them knew that their birth parents were already on their way home. The Keth Mori fleet had found other survivors and built their numbers into a massive force. They were returning to collect their cubs and turn them into the greatest warriors their species had ever known. They had no idea that the cubs they left behind had become something entirely new. Something that would challenge everything the Keth Mori thought they knew about strength, family, and what it meant to be alive in a dangerous galaxy. The alarm in the New Denver Colony control room screamed like a dying animal. Captain Jake Morrison, now 7 years older and grayer, rushed to the scanner display. What he saw there made his blood turn cold. 50 massive ships hung in space beyond the colony. Each one was the size of a city. Each one was armed with enough weapons to turn a planet into dust. The Keth Mori had returned. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," reported Communications Officer Betty Walsh. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was the same one Jake remembered from 7 years ago, but it carried more authority now. "This is High Commander Zektar of the Bonewing Fleet. We have come to collect our cubs." Jake took a deep breath. He had been dreading this day for years. "Welcome back, Commander. We need to talk before any reunions take place." "Talk? There is nothing to discuss. You were keeping our cubs safe. Now we take them home." "It's not that simple anymore." An hour later, Zektar stood in the same meeting room where he had first asked for human help, but now he was not alone. 6 other Keth Mori commanders flanked him, each one larger and more battle-scarred than the last. Their yellow eyes swept the room with predatory alertness. Dr. Lisa Chen sat across from them, her hands shaking slightly. Colony Director Helen Brooks had insisted on attending, along with several of the adoptive parents. John and Maria Parker were there, as were Steve and Janet Cooper. "Where are our cubs?" demanded Sub-Commander Kathek, a massive Keth Mori with black fur and silver claws. "Why do we not see them?" "They're in school," Maria Parker said quietly. The Keth Mori commanders looked at each other with confusion. "School?" Zektar asked. "They're learning," Dr. Chen explained. "Reading, writing, mathematics, science, history. They attend classes with the human children." Kathek's ears flattened against his head. "Cubs should be learning to fight, not to read. You have made them weak." "With respect, Commander," said John Parker, "you should meet them before you judge what they've become." Jake stood up. "I think that's a good idea. Let me call them." 20 minutes later, Alex Parker walked into the meeting room. He was now 12 years old and stood 7 feet tall. His silver-gray fur was clean and well-groomed. He wore a New Denver High School baseball cap and a shirt that read, "Colony Soccer Team." When he saw the Keth Mori commanders, he stopped and stared. Zektar rose from his chair, his yellow eyes fixed on Alex with surprise. You are one of our cubs." "I guess so," Alex said. His voice was deep, but still carried the accent of someone who had grown up speaking human languages. "I'm Alex Parker. These are my parents, John and Maria," Kathek snarled. "Your parents are Keth Mori. These humans are nothing to you." Alex's yellow eyes flashed with anger, but when he spoke, his voice stayed calm. "Don't talk about my family that way." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kathek stepped forward, his claws extending. "You dare challenge a superior warrior?" "I'm protecting people I love," Alex replied. "Isn't that what warriors are supposed to do?" Before Kathek could respond, 3 more cubs entered the room. Luna Cooper, Max Rodriguez, and Diana Foster moved to stand beside Alex. They were all massive by human standards, but they positioned themselves to shield the human adults rather than to establish dominance. "These are my pack mates," Alex said, using a Keth Mori term but pronouncing it with human warmth. "Luna, Max, and Diana." Zektar studied the 4 cubs. "You are all larger than I expected. Stronger. But where is your warrior bearing? Why do you not show proper submission to your superiors?" "Because we don't think of people as superior or inferior," Luna said. Her white fur with black spots made her look almost friendly, but her yellow eyes held intelligence that surprised the commanders. We think of them as family or strangers, friends or enemies. Foolish cub, Kathek growled. Strength determines rank. I am stronger than you, therefore you submit to me. Max Rodriguez stepped forward. At 13, he was the largest of the cubs and probably outweighed Kathek. Are you stronger than me? Kathek looked up at Max with sudden uncertainty. You are still a cub. Cubs do not challenge adults. I'm not challenging you, Max said gently. I'm asking if you want to arm wrestle. It's a human game. The loser buys the winner ice cream. The Kethmori commanders stared at Max as if he had started speaking an alien language. Diana Foster laughed, a sound that somehow mixed human humor with Kethmori vocal patterns. He doesn't know what ice cream is, Diana explained to Max. Remember, they've been in deep space for 7 years. Dr. Chen watched the interaction with fascination. The cubs showed no fear of the adult Kethmori, but they also showed no aggression. They were treating the commanders like interesting strangers rather than pack leaders or threats. This is wrong, Kathek said to Zektar. They have been corrupted. They think like prey animals, not predators. Alex's expression hardened. We think like protectors. There's a difference. Show me, Zektar said quietly. What do you mean? Show me how you protect. Show me how you fight. John Parker started to object, but Alex held up one clawed hand. It's okay, Dad. I can handle this. Alex looked around the room and saw Sophie Parker hiding behind her mother. His little sister was only 8 years old and looked terrified of the large alien warriors. Sophie, come here, Alex said gently. The little girl ran to Alex, who picked her up and set her on his shoulders. See, this is what I protect. Not territory, not resources, not power. People, family, the ones who can't protect themselves. A warrior's duty is to make himself stronger, Kathek insisted, not to coddle the weak. A warrior's duty is to use his strength for those who need it, Alex replied. At least that's what my family taught me. Zektar was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. These cubs have been changed. They are not Kethmori, as we understand the term. But they're still your species, Dr. Chen said. They still have all the same physical abilities. They're just using them differently. They have been made weak by human sentiment, Kathek declared. We will take them back to the fleet and retrain them properly. Luna stepped forward. And if we refuse? The question hung in the air like a bomb. By Kethmori law, cubs belong to the adults of their species. They had no right to refuse anything. But these cubs had been raised with human ideas about choice and freedom. Cubs do not refuse their elders, Zektar said firmly. Then I guess we're not regular cubs, Diana said with a smile that showed all her fangs. Kathek had heard enough. Zektar, this is madness. They have been poisoned by human weakness. We should take them now and begin proper training immediately. Wait, Alex said. In Kethmori tradition, doesn't a cub have the right to challenge for independence when he reaches maturity? Zektar's ears pricked forward. You know our traditions? Dr. Chen taught us about our birth culture. I know that any Kethmori can earn the right to choose his own path through single combat. I also know that right extends to cubs who can prove they've reached adult status. You would challenge me? Zektar asked with disbelief. If that's what it takes to protect my family and my packmates, yes. The room fell silent. John and Maria Parker looked terrified. The other human parents grabbed their adopted children protectively. The Kethmori commanders seemed stunned that a cub would make such a request. But Zektar smiled for the first time since arriving. Very well. By ancient law, I accept your challenge. Single combat, tomorrow at dawn. If you win, you and your packmates choose your own path. If you lose, You all return to the fleet for proper training. Alex looked at his human parents, then at his packmates. Deal. As the Kethmori commanders left the meeting room, Jake Morrison realized that everything was about to change. The Cubs had spent 7 years learning human ways, but tomorrow they would have to fight like Kethmori to earn the right to keep being human. The question was, could someone raised with human values defeat a warrior trained for nothing but battle? The answer would determine not just the fate of 4 Cubs, but the future relationship between 2 very different species. Dawn broke over New Denver Colony like a blood-red warning. In the main square, 2 circles had been drawn in the dirt according to ancient Kethmori tradition. One large circle for combat, one smaller circle for witnesses. Nearly every human in the colony had gathered to watch, along with dozens of Kethmori warriors who had come down from their ships. Alex Parker stood at the edge of the combat circle, wearing simple clothes that wouldn't restrict his movement. His adoptive parents stood with the other human families, their faces tight with worry. Sophie Parker held onto her mother's hand so hard her knuckles were white. Across from Alex, High Commander Zektar prepared for battle. The alien warrior had removed his armor and stood bare-chested, showing the scars of 100 fights. His claws were fully extended, gleaming like silver knives in the morning light. "Are you certain you want to do this, Cub?" Zektar asked. "I have been fighting for 30 years. I have killed enemies in 1,000 battles. You are barely 12 years old." "I'm sure," Alex replied. His voice stayed calm, but his yellow eyes held a determination that surprised the watching Kethmori warriors. Elder Navigator Sekmara, the oldest warrior in the fleet, raised her voice to address the crowd. "By ancient law, this combat will determine the fate of the Cubs raised by humans. If the Cub Alex wins, all Cubs choose their own path. If High Commander Zektar wins, all Cubs return to the fleet for proper training. Combat continues until one fighter yields or dies." Dr. Lisa Chen gripped her medical kit tightly. She had spent the night studying everything she could about Kethmori anatomy and combat techniques. If Alex was seriously injured, she might be his only chance of survival. "Begin," Sekmara commanded. Zektar moved like lightning. His powerful legs launched him across the circle, claws aimed at Alex's throat. It was a classic Kethmori attack, designed to end the fight in seconds. But Alex wasn't there when the claws arrived. The Cub had rolled to the side at the last possible moment, using a move that came from human martial arts rather than Kethmori combat training. Zektar's claws slashed through empty air as Alex came up behind him. Instead of counterattacking, Alex stepped back and waited. "What are you doing?" Zektar snarled. "Why did you not strike when you had the chance?" "Because I don't want to hurt you," Alex replied. "I just want you to understand." The watching Kethmori warriors muttered among themselves. This was not how combat was supposed to work. Warriors attacked until one of them fell. They didn't talk. They didn't show mercy. Zektar attacked again, this time with a series of rapid claw strikes that would have shredded a normal opponent. Alex defended himself using blocks and deflections that Dr. Chen recognized from human defensive martial arts. He was turning Zektar's attacks aside rather than meeting force with force. "Fight back, Cub!" Kathek shouted from the edge of the circle. "Show some warrior pride!" But Alex had learned something different from his human family. He had learned that true strength wasn't about proving you could hurt someone. It was about protecting what mattered to you. For 15 minutes, Zektar pressed his attack. The High Commander was faster and stronger than any human, but Alex had been raised by humans who understood that speed and strength weren't everything. Every attack that Zektar launched, Alex redirected or avoided. Slowly, Zektar began to tire. His attacks became less precise. His breathing grew heavy. He had been trained to win fights quickly through overwhelming force. He didn't know how to handle an opponent who refused to engage on those terms. Alex, meanwhile, stayed calm and alert. He had learned patience from his human parents. He had learned to think several moves ahead from playing human games. He had learned to stay focused under pressure from his human teachers. "You cannot win by running away forever," Zektar gasped. "I'm not running away," Alex replied. "I'm waiting for you to understand that this doesn't have to be about one of us destroying the other." That's when Alex made his move. Dr. Chen had taught him about Kethmori anatomy, including the pressure points that could temporarily disable an opponent without causing permanent harm. As Zektar lunged forward with another claw strike, Alex stepped inside the attack and pressed 2 fingers against specific points on the commander's neck. Zektar collapsed to the ground, paralyzed but unharmed. The watching Kethmori warriors fell silent. They had never seen anything like this. Alex stood over their high commander, clearly the winner, but instead of claiming victory, he knelt down and began massaging the pressure points to restore feeling to Zektar's limbs. "What are you doing?" Zektar whispered. "Helping you up," Alex said simply. "The fight is over. Now we talk." Within minutes, feeling had returned to Zektar's arms and legs. Alex helped the commander stand, supporting his weight until Zektar was steady on his feet. Sekmara stared at the scene with ancient eyes. "In 60 years of witnessing combat, I have never seen anything like this. The cub has won, but he aids his defeated opponent. What does this mean?" Alex looked around at the crowd of humans and aliens. "It means we don't have to be enemies just because we're different. Commander Zektar is strong and brave. I respect him. But his way of being strong isn't the only way." Luna Cooper stepped forward from the edge of the circle. "Alex showed you that we haven't been made weak by human influence. We've been made different. We're still Kethmori. We still have claws and fangs and strength, but we use them to protect instead of to dominate." Max Rodriguez joined her. "We learned from humans that taking care of others makes you stronger, not weaker." Diana Foster nodded. "We learned that working together gets better results than fighting each other." Zektar looked at the 4 cubs, then at the human families who had raised them. "You defeated me without injuring me. You could have killed me easily once I was paralyzed, but instead you helped me recover. This is not weakness, but it is not traditional Kethmori behavior either." "It's human behavior," Maria Parker said from the crowd. "That's what we taught them." Kathek stepped into the circle, his claws extended. "This proves nothing. One lucky cub defeats one tired commander. Let me fight all 4 of them at once. Then we'll see how strong their human ways really are." But Sekmara held up her hand. "No. The challenge has been completed according to ancient law. The cubs have won the right to choose their path." "This is madness," Kathek protested. "These cubs have been corrupted. They will spread their weakness to other Kethmori." Alex looked at the angry sub-commander. "What if we could prove that our way isn't weakness? What if we could show you that human training makes us better warriors, not worse ones?" "How?" Zektar asked quietly. Luna stepped forward. "Give us a chance to serve. Give us a ship and a crew. Let us prove that Kethmori raised with human values can be more effective than traditional warriors." "Ridiculous," Kathek snarled. "Cubs commanding a warship. It would be destroyed in the first battle." But Sekmara was thinking. "The galaxy has changed while we search the void. New enemies have emerged. Our traditional tactics have not always been successful against them. Perhaps new approaches are needed." Zektar studied the 4 cubs who stood before him. They were clearly Kethmori in body, but their minds worked differently than any Kethmori he had ever known. They had just proven they could fight, but more importantly, they had proven they could think. "Very well," he said finally. "I will give you 1 ship and a volunteer crew. You will have 6 months to prove that your human methods have value. If you succeed, we will consider integrating some human training techniques into our military." If you fail, you submit to traditional Keth Mori education. Alex looked at his packmates, then at his human family. And if we succeed, we get to keep both parts of who we are? Keth Mori and human? If you succeed, Zektar said, you will have proven that strength can take many forms. As the crowd began to disperse, John and Maria Parker approached their adopted son. Are you sure about this? John asked. Space is dangerous. War is dangerous. Alex hugged his human parents tightly. You taught me that sometimes you have to take risks to protect the people you love. I love my packmates. I love this colony. I love both our species. If there's a chance to make things better for everyone, I have to try. Sophie Parker tugged on her brother's shirt. Will you come back and visit? Alex picked up his little sister and smiled. Try to keep me away. As the Keth Mori warriors returned to their ships and the human families went back to their homes, Dr. Chen realized that something historic had just happened. 4 alien cubs raised by humans were about to get the chance to change how 2 species understood strength, family, and what it meant to be a warrior. The real test was just beginning. 6 months later, Alex Parker stood on the bridge of the Keth Mori warship, Claw of Honor. The ship was smaller than the massive fleet carriers, but it was still large enough to hold a crew of 200. Most importantly, every warrior on board had volunteered to serve under the human-raised cubs. Wing Commander Alex, reported Luna Cooper from the communications station. We're receiving a distress signal from the civilian station Haven Point. They're under attack by Skrix swarm forces. Alex looked at the tactical display. Haven Point was a research station with 40,000 civilians, including families and children. The Skrix swarm were biomechanical parasites that consumed technology and turned living beings into more swarm units. Traditional Keth Mori strategy would involve a direct assault, accepting heavy casualties to destroy the enemy quickly. But Alex had learned different tactics from his human family and Dr. Chen's military training programs. Max, what's our status? Alex asked. Max Rodriguez had become the ship's chief tactical officer. His massive frame was squeezed into the bridge station, but his gentle nature made him perfect for coordinating complex operations. We have full weapons and shields. Crew is ready for combat. But, sir, if we attack the swarm directly, a lot of civilians will die in the crossfire. Then we don't attack directly, Alex decided. Luna, connect me to the station. The main screen showed a terrified human administrator named Director Kate Walsh. Behind her, Alex could see sparks flying from damaged equipment and hear the sounds of battle in the distance. Director Walsh, this is Wing Commander Alex of the Keth Mori vessel Claw of Honor. We're here to help. Thank goodness, Walsh gasped. The Skrix broke through our outer defenses 20 minutes ago. They're moving toward the civilian sections. We have thousands of people trapped in the lower levels. Alex looked at his packmates. Diana, what do the evacuation protocols look like? Diana Foster had become their specialist in non-combat operations, something that didn't exist in traditional Keth Mori military structure. Station layout shows 12 main evacuation routes, but 7 are blocked by Skrix forces. Estimated evacuation time for remaining routes is 6 hours. We don't have that long. Alex made a decision that would have been impossible for a traditional Keth Mori commander. We're going to save the civilians first, then deal with the Skrix. Luna, coordinate with the station's AI to identify safe evacuation routes. Max, I want teams standing by to beam down and escort civilians to safety. Diana, work with their medical staff to set up emergency treatment areas. Sub-Commander Veltak, one of the Keth Mori officers who had volunteered for the mission, stepped forward. Wing Commander, this is not proper military procedure. We should attack the enemy directly and worry about civilians after victory is achieved. The civilians are why we're fighting, Alex replied firmly. What good is victory if everyone we're trying to protect is dead? For the next 3 hours, the Claw of Honor conducted an operation unlike anything in Keth Mori military history. While Max coordinated small strike teams that kept the Skrix forces busy, Luna worked with the station's computers to map out safe corridors. Diana led medical teams that treated wounded civilians and helped families find each other. Alex himself beamed down with the first rescue team. His enhanced senses allowed him to navigate the damaged station in complete darkness. His strength let him move debris that would have trapped rescue workers. But most importantly, his human-learned communication skills helped calm terrified civilians who had never seen a Keth Mori before. "It's okay," Alex told a group of children hiding in a storage room. "I know I look scary, but I'm here to help. My name is Alex, and I'm going to get you back to your families." The children stared up at the 7-foot-tall alien warrior with claws and fangs. Then the oldest, a girl about Sophie's age, stepped forward. "Are you like the good guys in the stories?" she asked. Alex smiled, remembering all the bedtime stories his human parents had read to him. "Yeah, I'm like the good guys. Now let's go home." By the time the civilian evacuation was complete, the Skrix had consolidated their forces in the station's main reactor core. Traditional tactics would require a frontal assault that would probably destroy the entire station. But Alex had learned something from human military history that traditional Keth Mori tactics didn't include: the value of intelligence and strategic thinking over pure aggression. "Luna, can you interface with the station's manufacturing systems?" "Yes, sir. They have industrial fabricators in the lower sections." "Good. I want you to program them to produce specific items." Alex outlined his plan to his packmates and officers. What he described would have been considered cowardice by traditional Keth Mori standards, but his human-raised team understood immediately. Instead of charging the Skrix directly, they used the station's own manufacturing systems to create thousands of small devices that emitted frequencies painful to Skrix nervous systems. While the swarm creatures writhed in agony, Max's teams moved in with non-lethal capture equipment that Luna had designed based on human pest control technology. The battle was over in 30 minutes with 0 civilian casualties and minimal damage to the station. More importantly, the captured Skrix units provided valuable intelligence about swarm behavior and weaknesses. Director Walsh met Alex in the station's main docking bay as the Keth Mori teams prepared to leave. "I don't know how to thank you. We've dealt with Keth Mori forces before, but never like this. Usually they save people by killing everything that threatens them. You actually saved people." "That's what we learned from humans," Alex replied. "Sometimes the best way to win is to make sure nobody loses." 3 months later, Alex stood before the assembled Keth Mori High Command aboard the flagship Bone Render. The 4 packmates had been called back to report on their experimental mission. The conference room was filled with the most senior military leaders of their species. High Commander Zektar reviewed the mission reports displayed on the main screen. "In 9 months of operations, your unit has responded to 17 emergency situations. In every case, civilian casualties were below 5%. Friendly casualties were below 2%. Enemy forces captured for intelligence purposes increased by 400% over traditional methods." Sub-Commander Kathek, who had opposed the experiment from the beginning, stood up. "These numbers are impossible. No military unit achieves results like these." "No traditional military unit," corrected Elder Navigator Sekamara. "But these cubs have shown us something new. They fight not just to defeat enemies, but to protect the innocent. Their human training has made them more effective, not less." Alex stepped forward. "High Commander, we request permission to expand the program. Other young Keth Mori want to train with human families. And humans want to learn from us too. Captain Morrison on New Denver has asked if we can set up an exchange program." Zektar looked around the room at his senior officers. "Opinion?" Commander Thelvar, a veteran of 50 campaigns, spoke first. I have reviewed the tactical recordings. Their methods are unorthodox but effective. More importantly, other species have begun requesting Keth Mori assistance specifically because they know these units will protect civilians. For the first time in our history, added Navigator Sekmara, other species see us as protectors rather than conquerors. This opens diplomatic possibilities that pure military might never could. Kathek was the last holdout. And what happens to our warrior traditions? What happens to the strength that has kept our species alive for 10,000 years? Luna stepped forward. We're still warriors. We're just warriors with a different definition of strength. We protect the weak instead of culling them. We build alliances instead of demanding submission. We use our minds as much as our claws. Max nodded. And we're happier this way. Traditional Keth Mori live in constant competition with each other. We live in cooperation with our pack and our allies. We're stronger together than we ever could be alone. Diana added, the galaxy is changing. New threats require new solutions. Our human training has taught us to adapt instead of just applying more force to every problem. Zektar was quiet for a long time. Finally, he made his decision. The exchange program is approved. Young Keth Mori who wish to train with human families may do so. Humans who wish to serve alongside Keth Mori forces may apply for positions. We will create new military units that combine the best of both approaches. Alex felt a wave of relief and joy. Thank you, High Commander. You won't regret this decision. I know I won't, Zektar replied, because you four have already proven that strength can take many forms. You've shown us that our species can become something greater than it was. 6 months later, Alex stood on the observation deck of New Denver Colony, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. Young Keth Mori came to live with human families and learn about cooperation and protection. Human volunteers joined mixed crews to learn about honor and dedication from their alien partners. Sophie Parker, now 9 years old, tugged on her brother's sleeve. Alex, look, there's another ship landing. Do you think it has more of your people who want to learn our way? Alex smiled and picked up his little sister. Maybe. Or maybe it has humans who want to learn from us. Either way, it means more families are about to get bigger. Dr. Chen approached them, carrying a data pad filled with reports from the mixed units now operating across the galaxy. Alex, I wanted you to see this. The new Keth Mori human teams have the highest success rates and lowest casualty counts of any military units in galactic history. What you started here has changed how everyone thinks about cooperation and strength. Alex looked out at the stars, thinking about all the families that had formed across the galaxy because 4 alien cubs had been raised with human love. Dr. Chen, do you think we did the right thing? Alex, she replied, I think you proved that the most important thing humans can teach isn't how to fight or how to build ships or even how to survive. The most important thing we can teach is how to care about each other. And that lesson just made the whole galaxy a better place. As the sun set over New Denver Colony, Alex Parker stood with his human family and watched more ships arrive, carrying young beings ready to learn that strength and kindness weren't opposites but partners. The experiment that began with desperate aliens asking humans to babysit had become something that changed the galaxy forever. The Cubs had returned commanding entire war wings, but more importantly, they had returned with proof that love was the strongest force in the universe. Captain Jake Morrison's footsteps rang out as he circled the USS Liberty in Luna Station's enormous hangar. His ship looked nothing like the smooth, elegant vessels docked nearby. While other ships had graceful curves that flowed like water, the Liberty stood firm and boxy. Heavy gray metal covered every inch, marked with rivets and welded joints that showed pure human work. Admiral Patricia Wells watched beside him, her expression clearly showing disappointment. Behind them, alien visitors whispered to each other, their translation devices clicking softly. The Zenthari ambassador Keithvar moved forward, his tall blue body rising above the humans. His eyes studied the Liberty with clear disgust. "So this is humanity's contribution to the Galactic Defense Initiative," Keithvar said, his words carrying his species' musical quality. "A relic from the past." Morrison's jaw clenched, but his face stayed calm. He'd known this would happen. Everyone had expected exactly this reaction. The Liberty used only human technology, nothing from the advanced alien systems that other Earth ships now carried. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no quantum drives. Just fusion reactors, railguns, and thick armor. Chief Engineer Lisa Parker walked up to the group, her work clothes still marked with grease from final checks. She was young for her job, barely 30, but she'd personally designed half the Liberty's systems. Her brown hair was tied back simply, and her green eyes showed the pride of someone who'd built something with their own 2 hands. "The Liberty shows a return to human design thinking," Parker said to everyone. "We've taken a century of knowledge and used it our own way." General Vexthal, the Zenthari fleet commander, laughed. It sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Your own way?" he asked again. "You mean old-fashioned ways? This ship runs on nuclear fusion. My personal shuttle has better engines." Commander Ryan Foster, Morrison's second officer, shifted uneasily next to his captain. Foster was skilled, but he'd grown up with alien technology. To him, the Liberty looked as outdated as everyone thought. His sandy hair was styled perfectly, and his uniform was spotless, showing everything about modern military standards. "Sir," Foster whispered to Morrison, "maybe we should talk about the combat benefits?" Morrison shook his head slightly. No point explaining to people who'd already decided. The Liberty was his ship, his duty, and his faith in human skill. He'd spent 2 years fighting to get this project approved, arguing with admirals and politicians who wanted humanity to fully adopt alien technology into their fleet. Dr. Amanda Cole stepped forward from her spot near the ship's entrance ramp. As head of research and development, she'd worked hand in hand with Parker to create the Liberty's systems. Her red hair caught the hangar lights, and her blue eyes held the focus of someone who'd spent endless hours perfecting every small detail. "The Liberty's design thinking is unique," Cole explained. "Rather than depending on technology we don't completely understand, we built something we can fix, maintain, and change ourselves. Every bolt, every wire, every part is made by humans." Keithvar moved closer to the ship, his long fingers running across the rough, welded seams. "And what happens when you meet an enemy with energy weapons that slice through this ancient armor like nothing?" he asked. "What happens when quantum torpedoes pass straight through your hull?" "We've thought about those situations," Parker answered. "The Liberty's armor has different material layers, each made to absorb particular energy types. The whole design is modular, so damage in one area won't destroy the whole ship." "Modular?" General Vexthal said again with another musical laugh. "Like a child's toy blocks. Admiral Wells, you can't seriously want this ship in our defense fleet." Admiral Wells looked uneasy. She was a career officer who'd climbed the ranks by making smart choices. The Liberty wasn't smart in the eyes of the galactic community. Her gray hair was pulled back military style, and her lined face showed years of command. "The Liberty has completed all needed tests," Wells said carefully. "Captain Morrison's crew has practiced thoroughly with the ship's systems." "Practiced with outdated systems," Cathar noted. "This ship should be in a museum, not in combat." Morrison finally spoke. "Ambassador, respectfully, humanity fought space wars before we met your people. We know how to build working ships." "You know how to build ships that worked 100 years ago," the Zenthari answered. "Today's combat needs today's solutions. Energy shields that bounce back incoming attacks, quantum weapons that hit across enormous distances, navigation systems that predict enemy actions. This ship has none of these abilities." Lieutenant Karen Hughes, the Liberty's communications officer, stood quietly near the ship's command area. She was young and enthusiastic, just out of the academy, but she trusted the ship and its crew. Her black hair was cut to regulations, and her dark eyes showed the resolve of someone ready to prove herself. "The Liberty has something better than advanced technology. Hughes said suddenly, then turned red as everyone looked at her. And what would that be? General Vexthal asked, sounding amused. A human crew, sir, Hughes answered. People who know every system because we made it ourselves. Colonel Steve Barnes from Earth Defense Command stepped forward. He was a big man with graying hair and scars from fights with the Krellin pirates. His uniform showed more medals than anyone else in the hangar, and his voice carried the power of someone who'd seen real fighting. The Liberty Project has used up resources that could have built 3 modern frigates, Barnes said. Frigates with tested alien technology that we know performs in battle. Morrison felt everyone's expectations weighing on him. The Liberty meant years of effort, years of debating with officials and politicians. He trusted human engineering, the straightforward answers that had taken humanity from their home world to the stars. The ship is ready for duty, Morrison said firmly. My crew is trained and ready for any task you give us. Kavar waved his 4-fingered hand dismissively. Fine, Captain, but don't expect to join any real military actions. Perhaps you can watch over the outer mining colonies where the biggest danger is broken equipment. The alien group moved on, continuing their inspection of the more standard ships in the hangar. Admiral Wells followed them, leaving Morrison alone with his crew. Nobody spoke for several minutes. They don't see what we've created here, Parker said quietly. Morrison nodded, looking up at his ship. The Liberty might not look impressive, but it was tough, dependable, and completely human. Every choice in building it had been made by human minds using human thinking and human knowledge. They'll see soon enough, Morrison answered. When the moment comes, they'll understand. 3 months had gone by since the Liberty's inspection, when the emergency warning rang through every human station and ship across the solar system. Captain Morrison was in his quarters checking supply reports when the red light started flashing. The sharp battle alarm sound cut through Luna Station's quiet like a blade. Commander Foster rushed through Morrison's door without knocking, his face white and his hand trembling. Behind him came Chief Parker, her usual calm look replaced with something Morrison had never seen before. True fear. Captain, you need to look at this, Foster said, his voice strained. Long-range sensors have found something huge coming from beyond Pluto's orbit. Morrison followed his officers to the station's command center, where dozens of technicians worked frantically at their posts. Admiral Wells stood in the middle of everything, her face serious as she watched the main display screen. The image showed a cloud of red dots moving steadily toward the inner solar system. How many ships? Morrison asked, though he feared the answer. First count shows over 10,000 ships, answered Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake, the station sensor officer. Her blonde hair was pulled back tightly, and her blue eyes reflected her instrument's glow. Each one is about the size of a battle cruiser. The numbers hit Morrison like a punch. The whole human fleet had fewer than 3,000 ships, and that included cargo ships and mining vessels. Even with their alien partners, the combined defense force would be outnumbered more than 3-1. Dr. Cole rushed into the command center, holding a datapad full of readings. Her red hair was messy and her lab coat looked hastily thrown on. She'd clearly been working through the night again. Admiral, we're getting very odd readings from the approaching fleet, Cole said. Their energy patterns don't match anything in our records. The ships seem to phase in and out of normal sensor range. Phasing, Wells repeated, like the old Earth theories about traveling through dimensions. More than theories, it seems, Cole answered. These ships appear to exist partly outside normal space. That explains why our long-range weapon guidance can't lock onto them properly. General Vexthal arrived with a full group of Zenthari officers, their tall blue forms moving with their species' flowing grace. The general's eyes were wide with something Morrison had never seen in a Zenthari before. True panic. Admiral Wells, Vexthal said, his musical voice tight. We've identified the approaching fleet. They're Void Hunters, an old race that's been sleeping for over 5,000 years. Void Hunters, Wells repeated. I've never heard of them. Few have, answered Ambassador Keith Varr, who had just entered the command center. They're mentioned only in the oldest records of the oldest races. They eat entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty void behind. Morrison felt ice run through his veins. The thought of a race that could destroy whole solar systems was beyond anything humanity had ever faced. Even the worst battles with hostile aliens had been limited to single planets or small fleets. Colonel Barnes pushed through the crowd of officers, his scarred face showing the pressure of emergency planning. His uniform was wrinkled and his gray hair uncombed, suggesting he'd been pulled from sleep by the alert. "We're gathering every ship we have," Barnes announced. "The combined human and allied fleet will meet them at the solar system's edge. We can't let them reach Earth or the colonies." "What about the Liberty?" Morrison asked. The room went silent. Every eye turned to Admiral Wells, who looked uncomfortable under everyone's stare. Her lined face showed the burden of command as she thought about her choices. "The Liberty will stay docked," Wells said finally. "We need our most advanced ships for this battle." "Admiral, respectfully, the Liberty is ready for combat," Morrison protested. "My crew has trained hard." "Captain Morrison," General Vexthal interrupted, "this isn't the time for human pride. The Void Hunters have technology beyond your grasp. Your primitive ship would be gone within minutes." Commander Helen Price from Intelligence stepped forward, her dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her brown eyes held information she clearly didn't want to share. "General Vexthal is right," Price said. "Our first analysis shows that Void Hunter ships can phase completely out of normal space. Energy weapons go right through them when they're in that state." "Then how do we fight them?" Parker asked. "We're working on that," Dr. Cole answered. "Their phasing ability seems to have limits. They can't keep it going forever, and they must return to normal space to attack." "The plan is straightforward," General Vexthal announced. "We hit them with everything we have during the short moments when they appear to attack. Focused plasma fire from our entire fleet should overwhelm their defenses." Morrison watched the tactical display as friendly ships moved into position throughout the solar system. Sleek Zenthari cruisers with their flowing lines and energy weapons. Human destroyers covered with alien-designed plasma cannons. Transport ships moving civilian populations from the outer colonies. Lieutenant Hughes approached Morrison quietly, her young face showing determination mixed with fear. She'd been watching communications from across the fleet, and the reports weren't good. "Captain," Hughes whispered, "the evacuation ships report that several outer mining stations have gone completely quiet. No distress signals, no emergency beacons, nothing." Morrison nodded grimly. The Void Hunters were already starting their work, eating everything in their path as they moved toward the center of human space. Whatever they did to planets and stations left nothing behind that could send a signal. "Admiral," Morrison said, speaking louder, "I request permission to take the Liberty into battle." Wells turned to face him, her expression showing both sympathy and frustration. Behind her, the alien officers watched with barely hidden amusement. "Captain, I understand your wish to help," Wells said carefully. "But the Liberty's systems aren't made for this type of combat. Your kinetic weapons would be worthless against an enemy that can phase out of reality." "We don't know that for sure," Morrison argued. "The Liberty's weapons are different from anything else in the fleet. Maybe that difference is important." Cathar stepped forward, his tall form towering over Morrison. "Captain, your ship is built like a fortress from ancient times. These enemies fight with technologies that make fortresses meaningless." "The decision is final," Admiral Wells said firmly. "The Liberty stays in dock." "Captain Morrison, you and your crew will coordinate supply and repair work from Luna Station." Morrison felt the bitter taste of defeat. His ship, his crew, his faith in human engineering, all dismissed as worthless against an alien threat. Around him, the command center buzzed with movement as the fleet prepared for the biggest battle in human history. As the meeting ended and officers rushed to their stations, Morrison stood alone, watching the tactical display. The red dots of the Void Hunter fleet continued their steady approach, while the blue dots of the human and allied forces moved to stop them. Parker approached him quietly. "Captain, maybe they're right. Maybe this isn't our battle." Morrison shook his head. "Every battle that threatens humanity is our battle. They just don't see what we've built." The first shots of the battle lit up space like distant fireworks. As Morrison watched from the Liberty's bridge, the combined human and alien fleet had formed a huge defensive line at the solar system's edge, their energy weapons creating bright streaks of light across the darkness. From this distance, it almost looked beautiful. Commander Foster stood beside his captain, both men watching the tactical display that showed every ship's position in the battle. The blue dots showing friendly forces outnumbered the red enemy marks 3-1. But Morrison felt no confidence in those numbers. Something about this felt wrong. "First contact reports are coming in," Lieutenant Hughes announced from her communication station. Her voice carried excitement mixed with fear as she passed along messages from the battle zone. "Admiral Wells reports successful hits on multiple enemy ships." Chief Parker looked up from her engineering console where she'd been running checks on the Liberty's systems. Despite being ordered to stay docked, she kept the ship ready for immediate launch. Her green eyes reflected her instrument's glow as she watched every system. "Captain, something's not right," Parker said quietly. "The power readings from those weapon strikes don't match the damage reports." Morrison nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. The energy patterns from the fleet's weapons were huge, enough to destroy normal ships with single hits. But the Void Hunter ships seemed to soak up the attacks without major damage. Dr. Cole hurried onto the bridge carrying her portable scanner, her red hair flying behind her as she moved. She'd been watching the battle from the station's sensor array, collecting data on the enemy's technology. "Captain, the Void Hunters are doing something we didn't anticipate," Cole said breathlessly. "They're not just phasing out of reality to dodge attacks. They're phasing back in at different spots." "Teleportation," Foster said grimly. "More than that," Cole answered. "They appear to exist in multiple places at once until the moment they choose to become solid and attack." The tactical display suddenly changed as new red dots appeared throughout the battle formation. The Void Hunter ships had somehow moved behind the defensive line, appearing in the middle of the human and alien fleet like ghosts appearing from nowhere. "Dear God," Hughes whispered as her console filled with distress calls from the battle zone. Morrison watched in horror as the organized defensive formation fell apart into chaos. Ships that had been firing at enemies ahead suddenly found themselves surrounded. The careful battle plan that General Vexthal had made collapsed in minutes. The first death report came through Hughes's station like a physical blow. The USS Defiant, one of humanity's newest destroyers, had been sliced in half by some kind of energy beam that went right through its shields. 300 lives lost instantly. The Zenthari flagship is under heavy attack, Hughes reported, her young voice breaking with strain. "General Vexthal is asking for immediate support." Morrison clenched his fists as he watched blue dots vanish from the tactical display one by one. Each disappearing light meant hundreds of lives, friends, and comrades he'd served with for years. The Liberty's crew stood helplessly on their bridge while their fellow humans died in space. Commander Price's voice came through the station's communication system, her usually calm tone now urgent and frightened. "All stations, we've confirmed that standard energy weapons don't work against Void Hunter ships. Repeat, plasma and particle beam weapons are going through enemy ships without causing damage." "How is that possible?" Foster asked. "They're not fully solid," Cole explained. "The ships exist in a state between dimensions. Energy weapons can't touch matter that isn't completely present in our reality." The battle reports grew worse every minute. The Zenthari cruiser Starfire had blown up. After taking multiple hits from weapons that seemed to ignore its advanced shielding, the human carrier Princeton was reporting massive deaths from an attack that came from inside the ship itself, as if the enemy had somehow teleported weapons directly into the hull. Admiral Wells's voice crackled through the communication system, her normally steady tone showing signs of strain. "All ships fall back to defensive positions around Jupiter. We need time to regroup and study the enemy's abilities." Morrison felt sick as he watched the tactical display. The organized retreat looked more like a panicked escape as surviving ships fled toward the gas giant's protective gravity. Nearly half the combined fleet had been destroyed or disabled in less than 2 hours of fighting. "Captain," Parker said quietly, "request permission to power up the Liberty's systems." "We have orders to stay docked," Foster reminded them. "Our people are dying out there," Morrison answered. "Orders or no orders, we're going to help." Hughes looked up from her station with tears in her dark eyes. "Sir, I'm receiving a message from my brother's ship, the Constellation. They're trapped behind enemy lines with Maine. Engines offline." Morrison made his choice. Parker, bring all systems online. Foster, prepare for immediate launch. Hughes, send a message to Admiral Wells, telling her what we're doing. Sir, she'll have us court-martialed, Foster warned. Better court-martialed than standing here watching our friends die, Morrison answered. The Liberty's fusion reactors hummed to life as Parker began the startup sequence. Unlike the smooth, silent power systems of alien-designed ships, the human-built reactors made noise. The sound of raw power being controlled by mechanical systems filled the ship with purposeful energy. Docking clamps released, reported Lieutenant Tony Clark from the navigation station. The young officer's hands moved smoothly over his controls as he prepared to take the Liberty into space. His brown hair was cut to regulations and his steady manner helped calm the rest of the crew. Sir, Hughes said suddenly, Admiral Wells is ordering us to stand down immediately. Tell the Admiral we're having communication problems, Morrison answered. All stations prepare for launch. The Liberty moved away from Luna Station with the steady push of its fusion drive. The ship felt solid and reliable under Morrison's feet. Unlike the floating feeling of artificial gravity on ships with alien technology, this was human engineering at its best, built to last and built to fight. As they got closer to the battle zone, the scale of the disaster became clear. Debris fields marked the spots where proud ships had died. Escape pods drifted in the darkness, their people hoping for rescue that might never come. Captain, Dr. Cole called from her sensor station. I'm detecting strange energy, patterns from the Void Hunter ships. It's almost like they're not completely solid until the moment they fire their weapons. Morrison studied the enemy formation through the Liberty's viewports. The Void Hunter ships looked like shadows given shape, their dark hulls seeming to shift and blur as if they existed in multiple realities at once. Then we hit them when they're solid, Morrison said grimly. All hands prepare for combat. The Liberty entered the battle zone like a steel hammer entering a storm of glass. Around them, what remained of the combined fleet retreated in desperate confusion, while Void Hunter ships appeared and vanished like deadly ghosts. Morrison stood on his bridge watching the chaos unfold, his mind racing to find a pattern in the enemy's attacks. Commander Foster watched the tactical display where red enemy marks appeared and disappeared without warning. The Void Hunters seemed to follow no predictable movement pattern, striking wherever they wanted before vanishing back into their dimensional hiding places. Captain, the Zenthari flagship is taking heavy damage, Hughes reported from communications. General Vexthul is asking for immediate help from any available ships. Morrison studied the enemy ships through the Liberty's thick viewports. Unlike the sleek vessels of human and alien design, the Void Hunter craft looked like they were carved from black stone. Their surfaces seemed to absorb light, making them hard to see clearly even when they appeared. Parker, give me maximum power to the railguns, Morrison ordered. Clark, plot a course to intercept that group of enemy ships attacking the Zenthari. Flagship. Chief Parker's hands moved over her engineering. Controls with practiced skill, the Liberties. Fusion reactors responded with increased output, sending power surging through the ship's systems. Unlike the smooth energy flow of alien reactors, the human-built systems thrummed with mechanical energy. Captain, Dr. Cole called from her sensor station. I'm reading the enemy attack patterns more clearly now. They have to fully appear for about 3 seconds when they fire their weapons. 3 seconds, Morrison repeated. That's our window. The Liberty approached the battle at a steady pace, its thick armor plating designed to take punishment rather than avoid it. Foster coordinated the approach while Clark adjusted their course to bring them within range of the enemy formation. Sir, we're receiving communications from Admiral Wells, Hughes announced. She's ordering us to pull back immediately. Tell the Admiral we're too busy to chat, Morrison answered, his eyes fixed on the nearest Void Hunter ship. The enemy ship appeared directly ahead of them, its dark hull becoming solid as it prepared to fire on the damaged Zenthari flagship. Morrison could see weapon ports opening along the alien ship's sides, energy building for what would be a killing shot. Fire, Morrison commanded. The Liberty's main railgun spoke with a sound like thunder. The tungsten projectile sped up to a huge fraction of light speed, crossed the distance between ships in milliseconds. The Void Hunter ship, solid and vulnerable in its attack form, took the hit directly in its center. The result was spectacular. The kinetic projectile punched through the alien ship's hull like it was made of paper, the impact creating a chain reaction of explosions that tore the ship apart from the inside. Debris scattered in all directions as the first Void Hunter ship died. "Direct hit," Foster announced, his voice filled with amazement. "The target is completely destroyed." Around the battle zone, human and alien ships that had been retreating in despair suddenly stopped. The impossible had happened. Someone had actually killed a Void Hunter ship. "Hughes, open a channel to all surviving ships," Morrison ordered. "It's time to share what we've learned." The young communications officer's fingers flew over her controls, establishing contact with every ship in the scattered fleet. Her dark eyes showed excitement as she realized they'd found a way to fight back. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison aboard the Liberty," Morrison announced. "The enemy can be hurt when they appear to attack. Kinetic weapons work against their solid hulls." Dr. Cole studied her sensors as another Void Hunter ship approached their position. The enemy ship flickered in and out of reality, searching for a good angle of attack on the Liberty. "Captain, I'm tracking the enemy's appearing cycle," Cole reported. "They seem to follow a pattern, semi-solid for movement, fully solid for 3 seconds during attacks, then back to dimensional phase." "Parker, prepare the secondary railguns," Morrison commanded. "Foster, coordinate targeting with Cole's predictions." The Liberty turned to face 3 Void Hunter ships that had appeared around them in a triangle formation. The enemy ships moved like sharks circling their prey, looking for the perfect moment to strike. Lieutenant Clark worked his navigation controls with steady hands, keeping the Liberty positioned so its main weapons could hit multiple targets. His calm manner helped the rest of the crew focus on their tasks, despite the overwhelming odds they faced. "First target appearing in 5 seconds, Cole announced. Morrison watched the tactical display as the lead Void Hunter ship began to become solid. Its dark hull became more clear as it prepared to unleash its weapons on the Liberty's thick armor. "Fire all railguns," Morrison ordered. 3 tungsten projectiles struck the enemy ship at the same time, the kinetic impacts tearing through its hull like bullets through cardboard. The Void Hunter ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light and debris. "Second target appearing," Cole called out. The Liberty's crew worked with machine-like precision. Parker redirected power from the ship's energy weapons to boost the kinetic weapon's charging speed. Foster calculated firing solutions, while Clark maneuvered to keep their targets in range. The second Void Hunter ship appeared just as the Liberty's weapons finished recharging. Another round of tungsten slugs found their mark, punching through the alien ship's hull and causing massive internal explosions. "This is Admiral Wells," came a transmission from the fleet flagship. "Liberty, explain your success against enemy ships." "Admiral, kinetic weapons can punch through their hulls when they're solid," Morrison answered. "Energy weapons pass through them, but old-fashioned projectiles work perfectly. Around the battle zone, surviving ships began to change their tactics. Ships with kinetic weapons moved into firing positions, while those without began ramming attacks when the enemy appeared. The tide of battle was slowly beginning to turn. "Third target coming around," Foster announced. The final Void Hunter ship in their immediate area appeared behind the Liberty, hoping to catch them while their main guns were recharging. But Morrison had expected this move. "Parker, fire the stern railguns," Morrison commanded. The Liberty's rear-facing weapons, smaller than the main guns but just as deadly, sent their projectiles into the enemy ship's forward section. The Void Hunter ship buckled under the impact, its hull cracking open like an egg. "All targets in immediate area destroyed," Foster reported. Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. Parker's face showed the satisfaction of an engineer whose designs had worked perfectly. Hughes beamed with pride as she coordinated communications between the scattered fleet elements. Cole continued tracking enemy movements with scientific precision. "Hughes, patch me through to the entire fleet," Morrison said. "Channel open, sir." "All ships, this is Captain Morrison. The enemy is not unbeatable. They can die just like any other ship when you hit them hard enough. Use kinetic weapons, ramming attacks, or anything else that can deliver physical force when they appear. We're going to win this fight." The Liberty turned toward the largest group of Void Hunter ships, its crew ready to prove that human engineering could beat any enemy. The Liberty charged through the heart of the Void Hunter formation like a battering ram through glass doors. Morrison stood on his bridge, watching as the tide of battle shifted in ways no one had thought possible. The ship that everyone had mocked as primitive and useless was now leading the fight against an enemy that had seemed unbeatable. Commander Foster coordinated the tactical display as surviving. Ships from across the fleet began to rally around the Liberty's position, the human destroyer. Courage had managed to ram 2 Void Hunter ships when they appeared, sacrificing its own hull to prove that physical force could destroy the enemy. The Zenthari cruiser Windstorm was using its emergency kinetic thrusters as weapons, striking enemy ships during their vulnerable appearing periods. "Captain, we're receiving requests for tactical coordination from 17 ships," Lieutenant Hughes reported from communications. Her voice carried excitement and pride as ship after ship asked the Liberty for guidance. "Admiral Wells is requesting immediate conference with you." Chief Parker watched the Liberty systems from her engineering station, her green eyes bright with satisfaction as every system performed exactly as designed. The fusion reactors ran at maximum efficiency, the railguns cycled smoothly through their firing sequences, and the thick armor plating absorbed enemy return fire without major damage. "Parker, what's our ammunition status?" Morrison asked. "We have enough tungsten slugs for about 40 more full rounds," Parker answered. "The manufacturing bay is making more projectiles, but we're using them faster than we can produce them." Dr. Cole looked up from her sensor station where she'd been tracking the enemy's formation patterns. Her red hair was messy from hours of intense focus, but her blue eyes showed the excitement of someone making groundbreaking discoveries. "Captain, I think I understand their command structure," Cole announced. "The largest Void Hunter ship at the center of their formation seems to be directing the others. If we could destroy it, the rest might lose their tactical coordination." Morrison studied the tactical display, where a massive red dot marked the enemy flagship. The ship was easily 3 times the Liberty's size and surrounded by dozens of smaller ships that moved in perfect sync with their leader. "That's a lot of firepower protecting their command ship," Foster noted. "Then we go through it," Morrison answered simply. Lieutenant Clark adjusted the Liberty's course toward the enemy flagship, while Hughes coordinated with the other ships that had joined their attack formation. The young navigation officer's steady hands kept them moving smoothly through the debris field that marked the battle's progress. "Admiral Wells on secure channel," Hughes announced. "Put her through," Morrison said. "Captain Morrison, I owe you an apology," Admiral Wells said, her voice carrying both thanks and amazement. "Your ship and crew have shown abilities that no one expected." "Thank you, Admiral, but we're not done yet," Morrison answered. "We need to coordinate a final attack on their command ship." "Agreed. I'm transferring tactical command of all surviving ships to your position. You've earned the right to finish what you started." Morrison felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders as ships throughout the battle zone began to take orders from the Liberty. The ship that had been dismissed as outdated was now leading the biggest space battle in human history. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison," he announced over the fleet communications channel. "We're going to hit their flagship with everything we have. Ships with kinetic weapons will focus fire when it appears. All other ships will provide ramming attacks and interference." The combined fleet moved toward the Void Hunter command ship in a formation that would have been impossible hours earlier. Human destroyers flew alongside Zenthari cruisers, their crews working together with desperate efficiency. Mining ships from the outer colonies used their industrial equipment as weapons, while transport ships served as shields for the more heavily armed warships. "Enemy flagship beginning appearing sequence," Dr. Cole announced. "It's massive, Captain, easily the size of 3 battleships." The Void Hunter command ship became solid in space like a mountain of black stone. Its hull was covered with weapons that began charging for what would be a devastating attack on the approaching human and alien ships. "All ships, fire everything," Morrison commanded. The Liberty's main railgun spoke first, their tungsten projectiles crossing the distance to the enemy flagship in seconds. The kinetic rounds struck the massive ship's hull with tremendous force, punching deep holes through its armor plating. Around them, every ship in the combined fleet added their own attacks. The human destroyer Phoenix fired its emergency supply of mining charges, the explosives detonating against the enemy ship's side. The Zentari cruiser Starblade used its construction beam as a cutting torch, slicing through hull plating that had seemed unbreakable. The Void Hunter flagship tried to return fire, its weapon systems tracking multiple targets at once, but the concentrated attack from dozens of ships overwhelmed its defensive abilities. Hull breaches appeared across its surface as kinetic weapons and ramming attacks took their toll. "Their hull integrity is failing," Cole reported with excitement. Internal explosions are cascading through multiple sections. Morrison watched as the massive enemy ship began to break apart under the sustained attack. Pieces of hull plating drifted away from the main structure and atmosphere vented from dozens of breaches. The ship that had directed the Void Hunter attack was dying. "Continue firing until it's completely destroyed," Morrison ordered. The Liberty's weapons spoke again and again, each round punching new holes in the enemy flagship. Other ships in the fleet added their own attacks, turning the massive ship into an expanding cloud of debris and escaping gases. When the Void Hunter command ship finally exploded, the blast lit up space like a new star. The shockwave rocked every ship in the area, but the Liberty's solid construction absorbed the impact without damage. "Enemy flagship destroyed," Foster announced. Around the battle zone, the remaining Void Hunter ships seemed to lose their coordination. They began to retreat toward the solar system's edge, their perfect formation breaking apart as individual ships fled the battle. "All ships pursue and destroy," Morrison commanded. "Don't let any of them escape." The combined fleet spread out across space, hunting down the retreating enemy ships. The Liberty led the pursuit, its crew working with the precision of a machine built for war. Parker kept the weapons charged and ready, while Hughes coordinated the fleet movements. Cole tracked fleeing enemies while Clark positioned them for best firing solutions. One by one, the remaining Void Hunter ships were caught and destroyed. Some tried to phase out of reality, but the fleet had learned to predict their appearing points. Others tried to fight, but their weapons were no match for the focused kinetic attacks of the human and alien ships. When the last enemy ship exploded in a brief flash of light, the battle was finally over. The Liberty floated in space, surrounded by the debris of the biggest space battle in galactic history, its hull scarred but whole. "Fleet reports all enemy ships destroyed," Hughes announced. "We did it, Captain. We won." Morrison looked around his bridge at the crew that had made victory possible. They'd proven that human engineering, human determination, and human courage could beat any enemy, no matter how advanced their technology might be. The Liberty turned toward home, carrying with it the knowledge that sometimes the simplest answers are the best ones.
At Starbound, we like to tell stories the human way, not with artificial slop or AI voices. What's HFY without humanity? So, subscribe if you want to keep it that way. My name is Dan, and let's begin. Salax had dealt with several problematic sapiens over his long career as head of the Species Integration Committee, but never before had he encountered a species as chaotic and as deeply fractured as humanity. They constantly bickered over small things. They went to war over equally small things. And they did all of this while barely bothering to address what truly mattered. Issues that were routinely buried in popular opinion beneath the latest fashion trends, some public scandal involving rich people, or another stupid cat meme that humanity adored for reasons no other beings could understand. The current problem afflicting Salix's committee was the need to map and categorize all the weapons humans deployed. This information would serve several purposes, from calibrating detectors in public spaces across the Galactic Council to devising rules of engagement against potential human criminals. The meeting to address these problems had only just begun, and already it was clear that things were not going well. Zopher, a red-skinned biped with several antennae sprouting over his head, each topped with large ocular globes that swiveled independently, surveyed the other two members of the committee before turning to Salix at the head of the table. The way he positioned his body, all four arms folded across his chest in a gesture of frustration, made his mood clear even before he spoke. "Director Salix," Zoffer began, "we must address the fundamental impossibility of our current task. The fragmentation of human society is way more serious than mere inconvenience. It is an absolute barrier to obtaining the weapon declaration we require." He paused, allowing two of his eye stalks to focus directly on Salix, while the others scanned the data tablets scattered across the table. "As an example, think of the structure of their civilization. They maintain over 550 distinct governmental entities across their colonies, each claiming sovereignty, each maintaining its own military apparatus. Within those entities exist sub-governments, states, provinces, autonomous regions, many of which develop their own security technologies independent of their nominal overlords." Zoffer's antennae quivered as he continued, warming to his subject. "But the fragmentation goes even deeper. Human corporations, private entities driven purely by profit, develop weapon systems that they sell to the highest bidder, often keeping the most advanced specifications classified even from the governments that purchase them. We've documented at least 80 major defense contractors across human space, each with proprietary technologies they guard as zealously as any state secret." One of his hands gestured toward a holographic display that materialized above the table, showing a dizzying web of interconnected nodes. "And beneath that layer, we have what humans call black projects. Weapons development programs so classified that entire governments don't know they exist. Intelligence agencies operating in the shadows. Military units with budgets hidden in bureaucratic labyrinths. Research facilities that officially don't exist, developing technologies that officially haven't been invented." The display zoomed in, revealing even more complexity. "Then we arrive at the individual level, Director. Humans hoard weapons personally. They build them in basements and garages. They inherit them from ancestors. They hide them from their own governments out of what they call principle." Zoffer's primary eyes fixed on Salix with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable if Salix hadn't spent decades in diplomatic service. "The conclusion is inexorable. Such a list doesn't exist. No single human on Earth or elsewhere possesses the knowledge, the access, or the authority to produce a comprehensive inventory of their species' weapons. And that is assuming they will be willing to share everything with us, which all evidence suggests they would not." Salix said nothing. His scaled fingers remained still on the table surface. But beneath it, where no one could see, the single bone at the tip of his reptilian tail tapped out an irregular rhythm against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. It was a vestigial trait, one that still manifested even after his species had abandoned physical combat entirely 30,000 years ago. His ancestors had used that tailbone as a weapon, whipping it against predators and prey alike. Now, it merely betrayed his impatience. The silence stretched for nearly 15 seconds before Wozok broke it. The amphibian delegate straightened in his specially designed chair, the moisture field around him shimmering a bit as he moved. He stared at Zoffer, trying his best to use his typical pair of yellow eyes to look the multi-eyed being in what approximated a face. "Are you proposing," Wozok said, "that we abandon the integration of humanity entirely? Because if you're stating that no human can provide a list of their own weapons,
The logical conclusion is that their species can never be integrated into the Galactic Council.
He leaned forward, his throat sac inflating.
Consider the implications, Zoffer. Without a weapons registry, how do we calibrate security scanners at spaceports? How do we train peacekeeping forces to recognize and respond to human weaponry?
Wozak's voice rose even more.
How do we establish rules of engagement? How do we determine what constitutes reasonable force in disputes? How do we prosecute weapons violations when we have no baseline for what should or shouldn't be present? Humans are simply not suitable for galactic integration. That is the hard truth.
When Wozak finished, Salix could see the pair of air sacs inflating beneath his colleague's mouth, in his neck, distending the translucent skin there until the purple circulatory vessels were clearly visible. It was a consequence of how much he'd spoken, how much oxygen his frail amphibian body had expended on words that, while true, didn't bring them any closer to a solution. A third voice entered the conversation, and Salix didn't need to look up to know it was Halara. At twice their collective height, a consequence of evolving in a low-gravity world, she had to lean forward to truly participate in their discussions, placing all her weight on her elongated arms on the table's surface. Her three jointed fingers, each nearly as long as Salix's forearm, drummed against the material in a gesture of contemplation.
"There's another dimension to this problem,"
Halara said.
"Now that humanity has already started their integration process, now that we've accepted their provisional membership, granted them limited trading rights, allowed them to establish embassies, a failure to complete their integration wouldn't be seen as a problem with humans and their species."
She paused, letting that sink in.
"It would be seen universally and unequivocally as a failure of this committee."
Salix noticed the individual reactions immediately. All of them were staring at him. Zoffer had oriented 4 of his 6 eye stalks in Salix's direction, the others scanning the room as if seeking escape routes. Wozak's throat sacs had deflated, but his fingers were pressing flat against the table, his whole body tensed as if preparing to leap. Halara remained leaning forward, her enormous frame creating a shadow that fell across half the table, her expression unreadable, but her posture demanding. Salix's tail stilled. His mind worked through the problem coldly and methodically. Question: could any single human produce their list? Answer: no, clearly not. Question: could the humans collectively produce their list? Answer: unknown, but theoretically possible. Question: what force could compel hundreds of fractious human governments to cooperate? Answer: self-interest, specifically the threat of losing council membership. Question: what mechanism could force that cooperation to be genuine rather than performative? Answer: public accountability and mutual human oversight. There might be a single way to solve this. Salix looked at each of them, his reptilian features settling into an expression of raw and unfiltered determination.
"We summon the human ambassadors,"
he said simply.
"All of them."
Zoffer's eye stalks swiveled in confusion.
All of whom?
"All the human ambassadors, representatives from all 553 individual human leaderships, countries, kingdoms, corporate states, autonomous collectives, whatever other governance structures they've invented across their space."
Salix's voice took on the authoritative tone he'd cultivated over decades of navigating council bureaucracy.
"We bring them together in one big room. We present them with the requirement, and we make it clear that the exit door doesn't open until they produce a complete weapons inventory with full documentation, descriptions, pictures, diagrams, schematics, operational parameters, everything."
He raised a scaled hand to forestall the objections he could see forming.
I know what you're thinking. They'll refuse. They'll argue. They'll claim it's impossible, just as Zoffer has outlined. And you're right. Individually, they will. But we won't be asking them individually. We'll be asking them collectively, in front of each other, with the entire galaxy watching.
Salix stood, his full height still shorter than Halara, even when she was seated, but his presence filled the room nonetheless.
Humans have this particular characteristic. They're intensely competitive with each other. If we make this a public challenge, if we make it clear that their integration depends on their ability to cooperate, they'll be forced to prove they can do it. No single human can produce this list, but all of them together, they'll have no choice but to try. It should work, he continued. We establish the requirement publicly. We make it a matter of record that humanity's council membership depends on this documentation. We give them a deadline, 1 week, perhaps, long enough to be reasonable, but short enough to maintain urgency. And critically, we make it their problem to solve, not ours.
Wazok was the first to respond, his throat sac inflating.
It shifts the burden of proof.
He paused, then added,
Though I have one concern. What if they simply refuse en masse?
Salix nodded, acknowledging the point.
Then we make it clear, publicly and unequivocally, that the integration process terminates. We've given them every opportunity. We've been more than reasonable. And if they can't meet this basic requirement, a requirement we've placed on every species in the Council's history, then they've disqualified themselves. The political damage Halara mentioned still occurs, but we'll have documentation proving we did everything possible.
Zoffer's antennae quivered, his multiple eyes blinking in an asynchronous pattern that indicated deep thought.
I accept the logic, though I have a different concern. Where do we house this meeting? 553 ambassadors, plus their staff, plus security, plus the documentation they'll need to produce. Even our largest conference facilities aren't designed for gatherings of that size.
We'll find a venue,
Salix said, with more confidence than he felt.
The Council has relationships with hundreds of species. Someone will have a facility large enough. We make it work because we have to.
Halara's long fingers steepled together, creating a cage of bones.
My observation is more practical. We need to control the narrative. When we issue this summons, when we make this demand, it needs to come from the Council President's office. We need the full authority of the Council behind us, or the humans will simply ignore it as bureaucratic overreach.
Salix considered this, then nodded.
Agreed. I'll draft the proposal for the President this evening.
He looked at each of them.
Any other concerns?
Silence answered him, the kind of silence that meant assent rather than confusion.
Then we're agreed,
Salix said.
We summon the humans, all of them, and we see if they're capable of the cooperation their council membership requires.
As the meeting adjourned and his colleagues filed out, Salix remained seated, his tail resuming its unconscious tapping against the floor. He was thinking about the implications, about the sheer logistical challenge of what he'd just proposed. Finding a venue large enough for 553 human ambassadors, plus their entourages, plus the committee members, plus council observers. It was ridiculous, really. The main assembly hall of the Galactic Council could accommodate one representative for each sapient species in the galaxy fairly well. All 200 of them could fit with room to spare. But it wouldn't be large enough for all the human factions.
One species, not even fully integrated yet, requiring more space than the entire rest of the galaxy combined. It was absolutely ridiculous. And yet, somehow, it was perfectly appropriate for humanity. The 3 months that followed were exhausting in ways Salix hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the bureaucratic challenges, though those were substantial, but rather the sheer volume of communication required. Every one of those 553 human governments had questions. Everyone had concerns. Everyone needed to be convinced, cajoled, or in some cases, subtly threatened into participation. Wozok had handled the parliamentary democracies, spending weeks navigating human political structures. Zoffer had taken the corporate states and commercial entities, his multi-threaded thinking allowing him to negotiate with several entities simultaneously. Alara had managed the monarchies and traditional hierarchies, her imposing presence translating well across communication channels. Salix had taken everything else: the theocracies, the military juntas, the anarchist collectives, and the handful of truly bizarre governance structures that only humans could have invented. Now, standing before the door of the great hall they'd finally secured, Salix felt a wave of exhaustion. The hall belonged to the Gorath, a species of giants who used it for their ceremonial gatherings, perhaps twice a century. Renting it had required negotiations that made Salix question his career choices, but it was the only structure he could find that could accommodate their needs.
I'm not ready for this,
Wozok said quietly.
The moment we walk through that door and tell them they can't leave until they produce a complete weapons inventory, we become the villains of whatever disaster follows.
Zoffer's eye stalks swiveled nervously.
That's precisely why we're doing it publicly. When they fail, and I maintain they will fail, it needs to be absolutely clear that the fault lies with human fragmentation, not with bureaucratic overreach on our part.
If they fail, Alara corrected, though her tone suggested she agreed with Zoffer's assessment. We still don't know that they will.
They will. Humans always find a way to fail, and they always do it in the most bizarre way possible,
Zoffer said flatly. Salix said nothing. He simply placed his hand on the door's access panel and pushed forward, leading the way inside with a confidence he absolutely did not feel. The interior of the Great Hall was as impressive as promised. The Gorath had designed it for beings 3 times Salix's height, so the ceiling soared overhead at a dizzying distance, supported by pillars carved from single pieces of stone. But the committee had made modifications. The enormous semicircle-shaped table that now dominated the space was human-sized, with human-sized chairs arrayed around it in dense rows. And filling those chairs were humans. So many humans. Humans of every shade of skin color Salix had encountered, and several he hadn't. Humans in formal suits that looked uncomfortably restrictive. Humans in flowing robes embroidered with precious metals. Humans in military uniforms bristling with incomprehensible insignia. Humans in simple tunics that suggested either poverty or philosophy. Humans with hair in every conceivable configuration, long, short, absent, colored in shades that definitely weren't natural, shaped into sculptures that defied gravity. And they were loud. Oh, were they loud! Multiple conversations in multiple languages created a wall of sound that hit Salix like an anvil. He could hear at least 10 distinct languages being spoken, probably more. Some humans were laughing, some were arguing, some were conducting what appeared to be business deals right there at the table. Salix noticed it instantly, the incongruity that made his brain stutter mid-step. In a section designated for the colony on Felix Prime, among the human representatives, sat what was very clearly not a human.
She was covered in fur, had distinctively feline features, pointed ears, and a tail that swished behind her. Salix leaned toward Wazok, not taking his eyes off the anomaly.
You handled Felix Prime. Why is there a Felesian sitting with the human delegation?
Rozak's throat sac swelled with what Salix had learned to recognize as embarrassment.
That's a Felesian, but she's also the human ambassador. The humans on that planet chose her as their representative.
She has fur and tail,
Yes,
and is very clearly...
the humans elected her.
Wazak interrupted.
There's nothing we can do.
Salix stared at the ambassador, who was currently grooming her arm with long licks.
Is this related to their obsession with cats?
He asked.
I'm afraid so.
Wazak confirmed.
Of course it is.
Salix forced himself to overcome the shock of humanity's diversity and found the strength to walk to the center of the semicircle. Each step felt longer than the last. The table was truly massive, wrapping around them in a gentle curve that put hundreds of human faces in his field of vision simultaneously. Some were watching his approach. Others were still engaging in their own conversations, apparently unaware or unconcerned that the committee director had entered the room. The walk seemed to take forever. He reached the center point, the focal position where the semicircle's geometry would carry his voice to all assembled. For just a moment, he hesitated. So many eyes. Then he straightened his spine, activated the vocal amplification system built into the floor, and spoke.
Ambassadors of humanity.
His voice boomed across the hall.
I am Director Salix of the Species Integration Committee. You have been summoned here to address a critical requirement of your provincial membership in the Galactic Council.
More conversations stopped. More faces turned toward him.
Every species that joins the Council must provide comprehensive documentation of their weapons systems and technologies. This serves multiple essential purposes. It allows us to calibrate security systems across Council space. It enables our peacekeeping forces to properly respond to threats and criminal activity. It permits the development of appropriate rules of engagement and conflict resolution protocols. And it ensures that all member species operate with a basic level of transparency that is foundational to galactic peace.
He paused, letting that sink in. The hall was quiet now, truly quiet, for the first time since he'd entered.
Humanity presents a unique challenge in this regard. Your species is fragmented across hundreds of sovereign entities, each with independent military capabilities, each with proprietary technologies, each with information that is not shared even among your own kind. This fragmentation has made the standard documentation process impossible to complete through conventional channels.
A murmur ran through the assembly. Several ambassadors were already shaking their heads.
Therefore,
Salix continued, his voice cutting through the rising noise.
This committee is making the following requirement. You, collectively, as representatives of all human governance structures across known space, will produce a complete and comprehensive inventory of all weapons systems, technologies, and capabilities possessed by humanity. This inventory will include detailed descriptions, visual documentation, technical schematics, operational parameters, and any other information necessary for the Council to properly integrate your species into our security frameworks.
The murmur became a rumble. Hands were raised. Voices called out. Salix spoke louder.
This inventory will include everything from the simplest personal weapons to the most advanced military technologies. It will include chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, exotic physics weapons, and any other category of weaponized technology. It will include weapons possessed by governments, by corporations, by private citizens, by criminal organizations, everything. If it can be used to cause harm, it belongs on this list.
Now they were shouting. Multiple languages competed for dominance. A man in a military uniform stood up, gesturing angrily. A woman in elegant robes was speaking rapidly in a communication device. And that third ambassador had arched her back and was hissing. Salix pushed on, his amplified voice overwhelming theirs through sheer volume.
You have 1 week, 7 standard galactic days. This hall will be sealed once I leave. Food, water, and basic facilities will be provided. Communication with the outside is permitted and encouraged. You will need to contact your representative governments to gather this information. But the doors will not open until you have produced the required documentation.
The shouts became roars. A man was standing on his chair, yelling something about sovereignty. 3 different fistfights had broken out in different sections of the assembly. Someone threw what appeared to be an expensive writing implement toward the center, though it fell well short of Salix.
Furthermore,
And here Salix allowed a hint of steel to enter his voice.
understand that the entirety of the Galactic Council is watching this process. Your success or failure here will determine not just your species membership, but your reputation across the galaxy. The choice is yours. Cooperate and join the Council as full members with all attendant rights and privileges, or refuse and remain isolated from galactic civilization indefinitely.
He let that hang in the air for 3 full seconds, then delivered his final statement.
I will return in exactly 1 week to receive your documentation. I expect it to be nothing less than pristine, comprehensive, and without gaps. The integrity of the Council depends on it. The future of your species depends on it. Do not disappoint me. Do not disappoint yourselves.
Salix turned and walked back toward the entrance. Wazak, Zoffer, and Alara falling in behind him in formation. The noise behind them was deafening now. Screaming in a dozen languages, the sounds of furniture being moved. Someone was crying. Someone else was laughing hysterically. As they reached the door, Salix glanced back one final time. 2 ambassadors were physically fighting, grappling with each other while their neighbors were trying to pull them apart. A third had climbed onto the table and was gesticulating wildly while delivering what was probably a speech, though Salix couldn't hear it over the general chaos. That third ambassador had climbed onto her chair and was standing on her hind legs, her tail bristling, yowling something that was definitely not diplomatic. The doors sealed behind them with a heavy, final sound.
That,
Wazak said into the sudden relative quiet of the corridor.
went about as well as could be expected.
They're going to kill each other in there,
Zoffer observed.
Possibly.
Salix agreed.
But if they do, it's not our fault. We gave them a clear task and clear parameters. What happens next is entirely on them.
I still say they'll fail,
Zoffer muttered. Salix said nothing. Deep in his chest, in the part of him that still carried the instincts of his predator ancestors, he felt an odd sensation. Not quite hope, not quite dread. Something in between. They would find out in 1 week. Exactly 1 week later, Salix stood alone before the door to the Great Hall, holding a communication device to his ear and trying very hard not to let his satisfaction show in his posture. Director Salix, the voice on the other end said, and it was a voice that commanded instant attention, deep, resonant. President Kazarath herself, the legendary draconic leader who had guided the Galactic Council for the past 3 centuries. I wanted to personally commend you on your handling of the Human Integration Challenge.
Thank you, Madam President.
Salix replied, keeping his voice level despite the way his pulse was racing.
I simply applied standard integration protocols.
We both know it was more than that. There was a warmth in Kazareth's voice, a rare thing. You found an elegant solution to an apparently impossible problem. Salix felt his scales flush slightly with increased blood flow, a physiological response to praise that he'd never quite learned to control.
The humans did the actual work, Madam President. I merely created the correct incentive structure.
Don't be modest, Director. You saw what others missed. That humans, despite their fractious nature, respond to collective challenges when properly motivated. I assume you're about to receive their documentation now.
I am, Madam President. I'm standing outside the hall as we speak.
Then I won't keep you. But Salix, well done. The Council is fortunate to have you. The communication ended, and Salix allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. The President herself, calling him personally, praising his work. This was the kind of recognition that led to higher positions, to greater authority, to a legacy that would outlast his lifetime. He was the one who had solved the human problem. Composing himself, Salix activated the door mechanism. As the massive portal began to swing open, he allowed himself to appreciate the moment. He had given them an impossible task, and somehow, against all odds, it appeared they had completed it. The scene that greeted him as he entered the hall was deeply satisfying in its own way. The humans looked absolutely exhausted. Many had visible dark circles under their eyes, a sign of sleep deprivation in their species. Clothing was rumpled, disheveled. Hair was in disarray. The polished diplomatic veneer they'd worn a week ago had crumbled, revealing raw humanity beneath. But they were organized. The fighting had stopped. The chaos had been replaced by a tense, exhausted camaraderie. And stacked against the far wall, in neat rows that spoke of desperate organizational effort, were physical storage containers of various designs. Salix walked to the center of the semicircle again, and this time he was enjoying himself. This was his victory lap. These sleep-deprived, fractious humans had somehow managed to cooperate long enough to produce what he demanded. It was impressive, really, and would make an excellent case study in applied bureaucratic pressure.
Ambassadors, he said, I trust you've had a productive week?
Several weak chuckles answered him. That third ambassador was grooming herself again, though she looked up long enough to emit what might have been a growl.
I'm here to receive the documentation we discussed. If someone could please bring me the inventory list.
For a moment, nothing happened. The humans exchanged glances, a ripple of communication passing through the assembly without words. Then someone in the back shouted something. The distance and lack of amplification meant Salix only caught fragments. Too long! And what sounded like 47, followed by words he couldn't distinguish. Salix's tail went rigid in a display of irritation.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? The list is 47 pages long.
The response was immediate and unexpected. Laughter erupted from hundreds of human throats simultaneously. Not polite laughter, but genuine, almost hysterical amusement. It rolled through the assembly like a wave, building and building until the hall rang with it. Salix stood in the center, confusion replacing his satisfaction. What was funny about 47 pages? That was actually quite reasonable, all things considered. Perhaps even admirably concise. After several dozen seconds, the laughter began to subside. One human in the front row, an older man with impressive facial hair, wiped tears from his eyes and spoke clearly. Not pages, Director Salix. Volumes, 47 volumes, and approximately 973 million digital files on top of that. The words hit Salix very hard. His tail went perfectly still.
I'm sorry, did you say 47 volumes, the man repeated, gesturing to the storage containers, each one averaging about 800 pages. We've also compiled digital documentation that's currently being uploaded to the Council Secure servers. Should be done in a few hours. Lots of video files, you understand. Demonstrations, historical footage, technical specifications that require visual aids.
Salix's mind refused to process this information. It couldn't be right. No species had ever produced more than a single volume of weapons documentation. Most managed to condense it to a comprehensive digital file. But 47 volumes?
I'd like to see them, he heard himself say. Bring me both Volume 1 and Volume 47.
A younger human rushed to the storage containers. She returned with 2 massive books, their covers embossed with official-looking seals from multiple human governments. She placed them on a small table that someone had wheeled to the center. Salix opened Volume 1 with hands that didn't feel entirely steady. His eyes scanned the first page, expecting to find some kind of elaborate joke. Comprehensive Inventory of Human Weapons Systems. Volume 1. Primitive and Historical Technologies. Compiled by the Forcefully United Human Ambassadorial Council. He turned to the table of contents. Categories. Hundreds of categories. Striking weapons, cutting weapons, projectile weapons, non-gunpowder, projectile weapons, gunpowder, incendiary weapons, chemical weapons, historical, biological weapons, historical. The list went on and on. He flipped to a random page. Bow and arrow. Classification, ranged projectile weapon, non-gunpowder. Historical period, 70,000 BCE to present. Still in use? Yes, recreational and hunting purposes. Variants, 46 major gravity-powered projectile launcher. Historical period, 300 CE to 1500 CE. Earth. Revival in some low-tech colonies. Still in use? Yes. Certain colonies maintain them for cultural reasons. Maximum range, up to 300 meters. Projectile weight, up to 140 kilograms. Detailed engineering diagrams, force calculations, historical examples of famous trebuchets. Salix felt something cold settle in his chest. He closed Volume 1 and opened Volume 47 with hands that were definitely shaking now. Comprehensive Inventory of Human Weapons Systems. Volume 47. Exotic Physics and Experimental Technologies. Compiled by the Forcefully Unified Human Ambassadorial Council. He opened a random page, and the words seemed to swim before his eyes. Antimatter Cannon. Classification, Exotic Matter Weapon, Ship-Mounted. Development status, Experimental. 3 prototypes exist. Yield, Variable, up to 500 petajoules per discharge. Effective range, 50,000 kilometers in vacuum. Safety considerations. Containment failure results in immediate detonation of remaining antimatter stores. Minimum safe deployment distance from inhabited areas, 1 astronomical unit. The diagram showed a weapon system that looked more like a small ship than a gun. Multiple failsafes, magnetic containment systems, warning labels in 17 languages. He flipped ahead, his movements becoming almost frantic. Kinetic Impactor. Relativistic. Classification, Mass Driver Weapon. Near light speed projectile. Development status, Operational. Deployed on 23 military vessels. Projectile velocity, 0.92 c, 92% speed of light. Yield, approximately 2.7 exajoules. Tungsten rod standard mass. Note: relativistic effects must be calculated for targeting. Time dilation affects projectile from reference frame of target. Rods from God. Orbital kinetic low-tech bombardment system. Male and hinting a note of vindictive satisfaction. Congratulations, Director. You really fucked up by forcing our hand. The best part is, you don't even know it yet. Salix stood frozen. The massive book stood open in his hands. Around him, he could hear more comments, more laughter. Do you think they understand what a mass driver is?
Half the species in the council don't have the material science to build half the stuff. But they might do it now. That's the whole point.
Salix slowly closed the volume. He looked around at the assembled humans, seeing them clearly for the first time. They were exhausted, yes. Sleep-deprived, yes. But underneath that, they were satisfied. Some were smiling. Others were grinning outright. They had done exactly what he'd asked. They had produced a complete and comprehensive inventory of all human weapons. They had cooperated, unified, worked together across their fractured governments and competing interests. And in doing so, they had just shared every weapons design they'd ever created with every species in the galaxy. "You'll get the rest uploaded within the day," the older man with the facial hair said. "All indexes cross-referenced, fully searchable, user-friendly interface and everything. We figured if you're doing this, you might as well do it right." Salix found his voice, though it sounded distant to his own ears.
Thank you, ambassadors. This is comprehensive.
"You're welcome, Director," the woman in the business suit said, and her smile had teeth in it.
"We're very thorough when properly motivated."
Salix walked back toward the door, his movements mechanical. Behind him, he could hear the humans beginning to pack up, their voices rising in celebration. They completed the impossible task. They cooperated across hundreds of competing factions. They'd proven themselves capable of the unity the Council required. And they just armed every criminal organization, every dissident faction, and every ambitious species in the galaxy with a comprehensive guide to human weapons technology. As the door closed behind him, Salix felt something he couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction, not dread. Something else entirely. The feeling that he'd won the battle, but might have just lost a much bigger war. The feeling that the human in the business suit had been absolutely right. He'd fucked up. He just didn't know how badly. Not yet. Historical Epilogue: The Lost Century. The scholars of the Galactic Council would look back on that moment, on Director Salix's well-intentioned but catastrophically short-sighted demand, as the first spark that ignited what came to be known as the Lost Century. Within 6 months, pirate organizations across the galaxy had upgraded their weapon systems using human designs. Within a year, criminal syndicates possessed antimatter weapons that had previously been theoretical to them. Within 5 years, the Council's peacekeeping forces were fighting asymmetric battles against enemies armed with weapons technology that evolved faster than defensive countermeasures could be developed. The kinetic impactors proved particularly popular among the lawless. Easy to manufacture with sufficiently advanced material science, impossible to intercept once fired, capable of devastating effect. Entire outposts were destroyed by what the humans casually referred to as throwing rocks really fast. The biological weapons documentation led to a nightmare period where engineered plagues swept through unprepared populations. The nanotech weapons sparked an arms race in microscopic warfare that no one had been ready to fight. For a full century, the carefully maintained order of the Galactic Council teetered on the edge of collapse. Criminal organizations became de facto governments. Entire areas descended into anarchy. The peacekeeping forces, designed for mediation and minimal intervention, found themselves fighting actual wars against enemies who had studied human weapons documentation like textbooks. And through it all, humanity's own weapons technology continued to advance. Because, as it turned out, publishing 47 volumes of weapons documentation didn't slow down human weapons development in the slightest. If anything, the need to stay ahead of the technologies they'd inadvertently proliferated across the galaxy pushed human research into overdrive. By the end of the Lost Century, when order was finally being restored, it was restored under a new paradigm. The weapons that had sparked the chaos were now obsolete. surpassed by new human designs that remain classified behind layers of security that Director Salix's naive demand could never have penetrated. The Council's structure was reformed. Humanity, having proven both their capacity for chaos and their necessity in combating it, took leadership positions across multiple security councils. President Kazarath herself resigned, replaced by a multi-species executive committee that included 3 humans. And the weapons documentation requirement, the standard bureaucratic practice that had existed for millennia, abolished entirely, replaced with voluntary disclosure frameworks and mutual security agreements. And notably, conspicuously, humanity was never asked or even allowed to share their weapons with the galaxy again. Some lessons, the Council learned, were expensive. This one cost a century.
The Valderone Combat Academy floated in high orbit above Sector 7, which was the kind of place where the galaxy's best and brightest went to learn how to professionally kick each other's asses. And by professionally, I mean with enough paperwork to choke a bureaucratic slime mold from Rigel 9. Jake Morrison stood in the back of Combat Theory Classroom 7B, trying very hard to look like he belonged there, which he did, technically. He'd passed all the entrance exams, survived the physical trials, and only caused 3 diplomatic incidents during orientation. That had to be some kind of human record, honestly. The other students called him Loophole. Not because he was small, though at 5'9" he was definitely on the compact side compared to most alien warriors. No, they called him Loophole because Jake had a very special talent, finding the exact letter of the law and then dancing the Macarena all over its spirit. Commander Threll stood at the front of the classroom, all 7 feet of rigid Krillian disapproval. He had 4 arms, which meant he could simultaneously hold a datapad, point at a hologram, gesture dramatically, and still have one hand free to massage the bridge of his nose when Jake asked questions. That 4th hand got a lot of exercise. Tomorrow, Threll announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority usually reserved for funeral directors and tax auditors, you will face your final combat examination. This will determine your assignment upon graduation. Fail, and you will be relegated to cargo escort duty. Succeed, and you may earn a position on an elite strike team. Jake perked up at that. Elite strike team sounded way better than babysitting space boxes. To his left sat Zara, an apex warrior who looked like someone had taken a panther, given it opposable thumbs, and taught it mixed martial arts. She'd made it very clear on day 1 that she thought humans were adorable, in the same way you might think a puppy trying to climb. Stairs is adorable. Patronizing, in other words. To his right was Grunts. That wasn't actually his name. His real name was something like Kirk, TKKKTsh, Boom, which sounded like rocks in a blender having an argument. Everyone just called him Grunts because that's the noise most people made trying to pronounce it. He was Gorlath, which meant he looked like someone's mountain had gotten up and decided to take a combat class. Quiet guy, though. Jake liked him. And then there was Pip, hovering near the ceiling because Pip was made of energy and didn't really do furniture. Pip was basically a nervous floating light bulb with anxiety issues and a voice like a radio stuck between stations. Nice kid, just a little high-strung. Literally. The combat arena will test your skills with melee weapons, Threll continued, pulling up a hologram of an obstacle course that looked like it had been designed by someone who really hated fun. Close quarters, multiple terrain types. Victory conditions are simple. Incapacitate your opponent or force them out of bounds. Zara cracked her knuckles, all 16 of them. Show off. You may use any weapon in the Academy's armory, Threll said. Then he paused, and his eyes, both primary and secondary sets, fixed on Jake with the kind of look a teacher gives the student who ate glue last semester. However, there will be restrictions. Jake felt the entire class turn to look at him. Why is everyone staring at me? He asked innocently. The plasma cannon incident, Zara muttered. That was one time, and technically the rule said no weapons above Class 4. It was a Class 9. Right, which is above 4. I was helping demonstrate why the rule exists. Educational purposes. Commander Threll's 4th hand was already reaching for his nose bridge. It was going to be that kind of briefing. Which brings me to the restrictions, Threll said, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had spent considerable time consulting with the legal department. For this examination, the The following are prohibited: plasma weapons of any class, energy-based projectile systems, railguns, photon accelerators, particle beam weapons, and molecular disruptors. The alien students nodded. This was standard stuff. Without ranged weapons, the exam would come down to skill with vibroblades, energy staffs, and good old-fashioned physical combat enhanced by whatever personal shielding and armor systems they could manage. Jake's hand went up. Threll closed all four eyes briefly, which in Krillian body language meant something between a sigh and a prayer for patience. Yes, Morrison. Just to clarify, sir, when you say energy-based projectiles, do you mean anything that uses energy to propel the projectile? Or specifically projectiles that are themselves made of energy? Both. Right. And railguns use electromagnetic acceleration. Got it. What about weapons that use compressed gas? Also prohibited. Okay, so chemical propellants are out too, obviously. Correct. What about spring-loaded mechanisms? Zara leaned over. Why would you use springs when we have gravitic accelerators? Just exploring my options, Jake said, pulling out his datapad and starting to sketch something. So, to be absolutely clear, Commander, the rule is specifically about modern projectile weapon systems. Things that use chemical reactions, electromagnetic fields, or energy to launch a projectile at high velocity. Threll's expression suggested he knew he was being led somewhere but couldn't quite see the trap yet. That is an accurate summary. Yes. And the definition of projectile we're using here is any object launched at an opponent from a distance using one of those prohibited propulsion methods. Morrison, where exactly are you going with this? Jake looked up from his sketch with a smile that would have made a used car salesman proud. Oh, nowhere specific, sir. Just want to make sure I understand the rules completely. Wouldn't want any confusion during the exam. Pip flickered nervously overhead. Oh no, he has that look again. What look? Grunts rumbled, his voice like an avalanche in slow motion. The look he gets before he technically doesn't break any rules while absolutely breaking every rule, Pip said. Jake continued, still sketching. So, just to triple-check my understanding, we can't use anything that launches a projectile through chemical propulsion, which would be like the old human firearms. Can't use electromagnetic acceleration. Can't use energy-based systems. Can't use compressed gas. Your summary remains accurate, Threll said slowly. But theoretically, if someone found a way to launch a projectile that didn't use any of those methods, that would be acceptable within the parameters of the examination. The classroom went very quiet. Zara stared at Jake. What other methods are there? That's literally every projectile system technology has developed. Well, Jake said, still not looking up from his increasingly detailed sketch. That depends on your definition of technology. Threll walked over to Jake's desk and looked at the drawing. It showed what appeared to be some kind of wooden contraption with a string and a trigger mechanism. It looked disturbingly simple, disturbingly primitive, and disturbingly like it fell into absolutely none of the prohibited categories. Morrison, Threll said quietly. What is that? Just an idea I'm working on, sir. Nothing that violates any of the stated rules. Jake looked up with eyes full of innocence that fooled absolutely no one. Unless you'd like to add any additional restrictions before tomorrow's exam? Commander Threll stood there for a long moment, his four hands clenching and unclenching. He was clearly running through the rules in his head, trying to find something, anything, that would stop whatever chaos Jake was planning. No biological weapons, he finally said. No chemical agents, no explosives. Wouldn't dream of it, sir. And Morrison? Threll leaned down, all four eyes fixed on the human. Whatever you're planning, it had better be good. Because if you embarrass yourself with some primitive human nonsense, cargo escort duty will be the least of your concerns. Jake's grin widened. Oh, Commander, I promise you, it's going to be historically accurate. The Academy's workshop at 2200 hours was supposed to be empty. Instead, it echoed with the sound of wood being sanded and Jake humming something that sounded like it came from a medieval tavern. Which, to be fair, it did. He'd requisitioned materials from the historical archives. Ashwood for the stock and prod, steel cable for the string, because he wasn't a purist when it came to tensile strength. And good old-fashioned metal for the bolts, machined to specifications that would have made a 14th century Fletcher weep with joy. The crossbow was taking shape beautifully. You cannot be serious. Jake didn't look up. He'd recognize Zara's condescending tone anywhere. Serious as a heart attack, which is what you're going to have when you see this thing in action. She prowled into the workshop, moving with that liquid grace that made her species such effective predators. Morrison, That is a stick with a string on it. Technically, it's a precision tension-based mechanical projectile system that predates chemical propulsion by about 400 years. Jake held up the stock, examining the curve. Also, it's beautiful. Look at that craftsmanship. It's wood. It's ash wood, carefully selected for its flexibility and strength. The Mongols conquered half of Asia with these. Well, with regular bows, but the principle is the same. He set down the stock and started working on the trigger mechanism. See, the beautiful thing about a crossbow is that it stores all its energy mechanically. You crank it back, and all that potential energy just sits there, waiting. No power source, no energy, signature, just physics being physics. Zara picked up one of the bolts he'd finished. And you think this pointy metal stick is going to defeat energy shields? Personal armor? Have you completely lost your human mind? See, that's the thing everyone forgets about energy shields. Jake finally looked up, his eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for mad scientists and people explaining their cryptocurrency investments. They're designed to detect and deflect high-velocity projectiles. Plasma bolts, particle beams, railgun slugs. All that stuff comes in hot and fast with massive energy signatures. Obviously. Right. So, the shields have sensors. They detect the incoming projectile, calculate trajectory, and generate a counterfield. It's all very advanced and impressive. He went back to his work. But it's also calibrated for modern weapons. There's a minimum velocity threshold. Go too slow, and the shield reads it as debris or environmental noise. Zara's eyes narrowed. And your medieval toy shoots below that threshold. Oh, it shoots plenty fast enough to punch through most armor. Just not fast enough to trigger shields designed for plasma bolts. Jake grinned. It's like having a security system that only detects cars, and I'm showing up on a horse. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And yet, completely within the rules, a rumbling sound announced Gruntz's arrival. The massive Gorlath had to duck through the doorway, and even then he barely fit. He moved over to the workbench with surprising delicacy for someone made of ambulatory geology. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the crossbow. "Be my guest." Gruntz picked up the weapon carefully, turning it over in his hands. His species had been spacefaring for 3,000 years, but there was something in his expression that suggested appreciation for simpler times. The mechanism is elegant. Direct conversion of muscle power to projectile force through mechanical advantage. Exactly, Jake beamed. No electronics to jam, no power cell to drain. Just you, the weapon, and basic Newtonian physics. It is also, Gruntz continued, extremely limited in rate of fire. Once you shoot, you must reload. In close combat, that delay could be fatal. Which is why I'm also bringing a backup knife. I'm not an idiot, Zara snorted. Debatable. Pip materialized nearby, flickering anxiously. Jake, do you actually know how to use that thing? Like, have you practiced? Pip, buddy, let me tell you a story. Jake set down his tools and leaned back. My grandfather was what humans call a history nerd. Spent every summer at Renaissance fairs, medieval combat demonstrations, the whole deal. Started teaching me archery when I was 8. Crossbows when I was 12. He picked up the crossbow, sighting down its length. Gramps used to say that modern warriors forget the old ways at their peril. He called it the art of technical compliance. Find what works, even if it's not fashionable anymore. Your grandfather sounds weird, Pip said. He was the best. He's also the reason I know that a crossbow bolt travels at about 300 feet per second, fast enough to be lethal, slow enough to be invisible to modern sensors. Jake started attaching the string. Plus, there's a psychological factor. Nobody expects medieval weapons in a space combat academy. Surprise is half the battle. Zara crossed her arms. You're going to embarrass yourself. Maybe. Or maybe everyone's so used to fighting with technology that they've forgotten how to fight against simplicity. He cranked back the string, testing the tension. The crossbow locked with a satisfying click. Besides, what's the worst that happens? I lose and get cargo duty? I was probably getting that anyway. You could get hurt, Pip said quietly. Jake's expression softened. Pip, I appreciate the concern, but I've thought this through. I've run the numbers. I've practiced. He loaded a bolt. And, more importantly, I've read the rulebook 17 times. Commander Threll said no modern projectile weapons. This baby is from the year 1000 AD. Doesn't get less modern than that. Gruntz set down the crossbow carefully. I look forward to seeing this weapon in action. Win or lose, it will be educational. That's the spirit, Gruntz. As the alien students left, Zara paused at the door. Morrison, when you lose tomorrow, try not to cry. It's undignified. When I win tomorrow, try to look surprised. It'll make my victory speech more satisfying. She left, shaking her head. Jake turned back to his crossbow, running his hand along the wood. Okay, Gramps, he muttered. Let's show them why the old ways still work. From down the hallway came the sound of Commander Threll's voice, reviewing the rules one more time with the legal department. Jake could hear the frustration in his tone. Tomorrow was going to be fun. The combat arena looked like someone had taken a military obstacle course, a parkour gym, and a gladiator pit, then smashed them together with complete disregard for safety regulations. Multi-level platforms connected by narrow bridges, scattered cover ranging from energy barriers to good old-fashioned concrete blocks. And in the center, an open space where most of the actual fighting would happen. The stands were packed. Combat finals always drew a crowd, mostly students hoping to see someone get spectacularly wrecked. There was also a distinct possibility they were here to see Jake fail with his primitive human nonsense. He was okay with that. Expectations were just opportunities for dramatic irony. Commander Threll stood in the center ring, all four arms crossed. Welcome to the final combat examination. The rules are simple. Incapacitate your opponent or force them out of bounds. Lethal force is prohibited, obviously. Medical teams are standing by. His eyes swept the arena. Let us begin. The first match was Zara versus Grunts, and it was exactly the kind of high-tech beatdown everyone expected. Zara moved like liquid death, her twin vibroblades humming with molecular disruption fields. Grunts relied on his species' natural density and a massive energy hammer that could probably crack a tank. The fight was beautiful in its own way. Zara's energy shield flickered and flashed as she deflected blows that would have liquefied a normal person. Grunts' armor plating absorbed strikes that would have bisected most species. It was technology versus biology, speed versus strength, and it ended with Grunts landing a hit that sent Zara sliding out of bounds. The crowd went wild. Grunts helped Zara up with one massive hand, and she nodded respect. That was class right there. 3 more matches followed. Each one a showcase of advanced weapons technology that made modern Earth militaries look like they were still throwing rocks, molecular blades that could cut through anything, energy staffs that delivered enough voltage to power a small city, personal shield generators that cost more than Jake's entire education. Then came the announcement everyone had been waiting for. Morrison, Jake, versus Skryx of Velstar. Jake walked into the arena carrying his crossbow and a quiver of 20 bolts. He looked like he'd time-traveled from a medieval battlefield, which was basically accurate. The crossbow was polished wood and gleaming metal, absolutely zero electronics anywhere on it. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Laughter rippled through the stands. Skryx emerged from the opposite entrance, and Jake had to admit, the guy looked impressive. 4 arms, each holding a curved blade that shimmered with some kind of molecular edge. His personal shield generator was top of the line, probably military grade. The Velstari were known for being assassins and ambush predators. This was not going to be easy. Skryx took one look at Jake's crossbow and actually laughed. It was a chittering, clicking sound that definitely meant the alien. Equivalent of, "You have got to be kidding me. A bow?" Skryx called across the arena. "Human, I almost feel bad about this. It's a crossbow, actually. There's a difference." Jake loaded a bolt with practiced ease. "But don't worry, I'll explain it to you, slowly." Using small words, Commander Threll raised one hand. "Combatants ready?" Jake brought the crossbow up to his shoulder. The weight was familiar, comfortable. He could hear his grandfather's voice in his head. "Breathe, aim, squeeze. The old ways still work, kiddo." "Begin!" Skryx activated his shield and charged. The energy barrier around him shimmered blue-white, a pocket of force that could stop plasma bolts and deflect particle beams. He moved fast, 4 blades ready to turn Jake into human confetti. Jake didn't move, he just aimed. The crossbow bolt left the weapon with a soft thwip sound, almost polite compared to the crack of energy weapons. It flew straight and true, a simple piece of metal and wood following a ballistic arc that would have made Newton proud. And it went straight through Skryx's shield like the barrier wasn't even there. The crowd went silent. Skryx's confident charge became a stumbling stop as the bolt punched into his shoulder armor. The armor held, barely, but the impact spun him sideways. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion in real time. "What? How did you? That's impossible!" Skryx sputtered. Jake was already cranking back the string for another shot. "See, that's a 50,000 credit shield you're wearing, top of the line, designed by the finest military engineers in the sector." He locked the string and loaded another bolt. calibrated to detect and stop projectiles moving faster than 2,000 meters per second, which is what most modern weapons shoot at. Skriex was backing up now, all 4 blades coming up defensively. My crossbow bolt, Jake continued, taking aim again, travels at about 90 meters per second. Your shield's sensors literally cannot comprehend something moving that slowly. It's like having a lock that only recognizes digital keys, and I showed up with a chunk of metal from the Bronze Age. That's cheating. That's reading the rule book. Jake fired again. The second bolt caught Skriex in the leg, and this time the alien went down. Not seriously hurt. The bolts were designed for impact rather than penetration, but definitely down. The arena was still silent. Somewhere in the stands, someone dropped their drink. Jake walked forward, crossbow lowered but another bolt ready. Here's the thing about modern technology. It's amazing, incredible really, but it's designed to fight modern technology. Nobody thought to defend against weapons from 1,000 years ago because why would you? Skriex looked up at him, all 4 blades still ready. This is humiliating. Yeah, probably. But you know what's more humiliating? Not adapting. Jake offered his hand. You charged straight at a ranged weapon. Didn't use cover. Relied entirely on your shield. That's not tactical, that's lazy. For a moment, Skriex just stared at the offered hand. Then, slowly, he took it. You fight strangely, human. I fight effectively. There's a difference. As medical teams helped Skriex out of the arena, Jake turned to face the crowd. The silence was breaking into confused murmuring. He could see Commander Threll in the judge's booth, all 4 hands pressed against his face. Jake raised the crossbow over his head. And here we observe, he announced in his best-natured documentary voice, the confused alien, whose expensive technology cannot comprehend pointy stick mechanics from Earth's Middle Ages. Truly, evolution has failed to prepare them for this moment. The crowd finally reacted. Half of them were laughing. The other half were probably calculating how much their own shields would cost to recalibrate. Next match! Threll's voice boomed, sounding deeply tired. Morrison advances. Jake walked back to Brend, the preparation area, where Pip was flickering with what looked like electronic shock. That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Thanks, Pip. I try. I mean, it violated every expectation of modern combat. That was kind of the point. Zara was there too, and her expression was hard to read. Finally, she spoke. That was either brilliant or stupid, and I genuinely cannot tell which. Why not both? She almost smiled. Next round is in 20 minutes. Don't get overconfident, Morrison. Not everyone will make Skriex's mistakes. Jake checked his bolts, making sure none were damaged. I know, but they'll make other mistakes. Because nobody here has trained to fight against medieval weapons. That's my advantage. Until someone figures you out. Then I guess I better win fast. Jake's second match was against Thraxus, a Mantelian with 8 eyes and reflexes that made most species look like they were moving through molasses. Thraxus didn't make Skriex's mistake. He used cover, moved unpredictably, and tried to close the distance without relying on his shield. He still lost. Turns out, a crossbow bolt doesn't care about your reflexes when you're committed to a jump between platforms. Physics is physics, and gravity doesn't negotiate. Match 3 was Krill, who brought smoke grenades and tried to obscure Jake's vision. Smart play, actually. Would have worked great against energy weapons that needed clear line of sight for targeting computers. Unfortunately for Krill, Jake had been bow hunting since he was 12, and his grandfather had taught him to aim by instinct. The bolt that caught Krill in mid-charge was pure muscle memory. By match 4, the other students had stopped laughing. They'd started taking notes. Jake's 5th opponent actually brought a riot shield, an old-fashioned physical barrier instead of an energy field. Jake respected that. He won anyway by aiming for the legs, but he respected the adaptation. The pattern was clear. The opponent came in with a new strategy, each one learning from the previous losses. They used terrain better. They adapted their tactics. They stopped relying on technology that couldn't detect medieval projectiles. And that, Jake reflected as he cranked back his crossbow for what felt like the 100th time, was exactly what he'd wanted. Make them think, make them adapt. Show them that fighting wasn't about having the best gear, it was about using your brain. Championship match, Commander Threll announced, and he sounded like a man who'd aged 10 years in 3 hours. Morrison, Jake, versus Kirk, TKKKT boom, called grunts. The arena erupted in cheers. This was the match everyone wanted to see. The human with his primitive weapon versus the walking mountain who'd won every match through sheer tactical brilliance. Grunts entered the arena, and notably, he wasn't wearing a shield generator. He had his energy hammer, sure, but his approach was different. Careful. Measured. Grunts, Jake called out. No hard feelings after this, right? None whatsoever. Grunts' voice rumbled like distant thunder. You have taught valuable lessons today. I intend to return the favor. Fair enough. Begin. Grunts didn't charge. He moved laterally, using the arena's concrete barriers for cover. Smart. He'd watched every one of Jake's matches and learned that staying in the open was suicide against a ranged weapon. Jake fired. The bolt sparked off concrete as Grunts ducked behind cover. This was different. This was an opponent who understood that the crossbow's greatest weakness was its reload time. Jake could get off maybe 2 shots per minute with careful aiming. Grunts just had to close the distance, and those massive arms could end the fight in seconds. Jake moved to higher ground, taking position on one of the elevated platforms. Better sightlines. More reaction time. Grunts anticipated this and circled below, staying behind cover, moving from barrier to barrier. The Gorlath was patient, which made sense for a species that lived for 300 years. Jake fired again. Miss. The bolt clattered off metal plating that Grunts had positioned between them. You are skilled, Morrison, Grunts called out. But skill has limits. So does patience. I have considerably more of it than you have bolts. Fair point. Jake had started with 20. He was down to 14. The math was not in his favor. Time to get creative. Jake moved along the platform, making noise, drawing Grunts' attention. Then he fired a bolt high, intentionally missing, making it clatter off the far wall. Grunts looked toward the sound. Just for a second, Jake dropped off the platform, landing behind a different set of barriers. New angle, new position. Clever, Grunts acknowledged, but he'd already adapted, moving to cover the new angle. This went on for 5 minutes. Cat and mouse, hunter and hunted, each one respecting the other's abilities, neither willing to make a critical mistake. The crowd was riveted. This wasn't the spectacle of energy weapons and flashy technology. This was tactics, pure, fundamental combat strategy. Jake knew he had to force a confrontation. At this rate, he'd run out of bolts before Grunts ran out of patience. He loaded a bolt, took a breath, and made his move. He stepped into the open, crossbow raised, directly challenging Grunts to engage. Grunts saw the opening and took it, charging from cover with surprising speed for someone made of rock. His hammer came up, ready to strike. Jake fired. The bolt caught Grunts in the shoulder, barely slowing him down. Then Jake did something nobody expected. He dropped the crossbow and pulled out his backup knife. Grunts' hammer came down. Jake rolled left, the impact cratering the floor where he'd been standing. He came up inside Grunts' reach, where the massive hammer was useless, and drove his knife toward the joint in Grunts' arm plating. The blade scraped off armor. Grunts pivoted, trying to grab him. Jake ducked under the grasping hand, swept Grunts' leg, which was like trying to trip a building. It didn't work, but it bought him space. He dove for his crossbow, rolled, came up with it loaded because he'd prepared a bolt in advance. Smart thinking there, Jake, and fired from 5 feet away. The bolt caught Grunts square in the chest plate. The impact staggered the massive alien backward. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. His foot crossed the boundary line. Out of bounds, Threll announced. Morrison wins. The arena exploded. Half the crowd was cheering. The other half was probably trying to figure out how to requisition medieval weapons. Grunts looked down at the boundary line, then at Jake, then started laughing. It was a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain, deep and genuine. Well fought, human. You combined your primitive weapon with genuine tactical skill. I am impressed. Jake was breathing hard, adrenaline still pumping. You almost had me. Another few seconds and I would have been out of bolts. Yes, but you recognized this and changed tactics. Grunts extended one massive hand. You think like a warrior, not like someone who depends on technology. They shook hands. Or rather, Jake's hand disappeared into Grunts' grip, but the spirit was there. As the medical team checked both of them over, largely a formality since neither was seriously hurt, Grunts leaned in close. Morrison, where might one acquire these primitive human weapons? Jake grinned. I'll send you some catalog links. Fair warning though, once Command sees what happened today, they're probably going to ban crossbows specifically. Then we should explore other options. You mentioned something called an atlatl? Oh man, Grunts, let me tell you about spear throwers from 10,000 BC. The post-combat briefing room was designed for calm, professional debriefing. Instead, it currently contained one extremely exhausted Krillian commander, 17 pages of hastily amended regulations, and Jake Morrison sitting in a chair looking far too pleased with himself. Commander Threll sat behind his desk, all 4 hands working simultaneously. 2 were typing new regulations into the database. 1 was holding a cup of something that was probably the alien equivalent of very strong coffee. The 4th was massaging his temples in slow, circular motions that suggested he'd been doing this for the past hour. "Morrison," Threll finally said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who just watched their entire worldview get pierced by a medieval projectile weapon. "Sir? I have been an instructor at this academy for 23 years. I have trained warriors from 467 different species. I have overseen approximately 9,000 combat examinations." He looked up, all 4 eyes fixing on Jake with an expression somewhere between respect and the desire to throw something heavy. "Never, in all that time, has anyone forced me to add the phrase, 'no weapons predating the discovery of gunpowder' to the official rulebook. I'm honored to be a pioneer. Sir, that was not a compliment. I'm choosing to take it as one anyway." Threll set down his coffee with a heavy thunk. "You do realize what you've done here, don't you? Right now, there are approximately 300 students attempting to requisition historical Earth weapons. I have received formal requests for longbows, compound bows, slings, atlatls, throwing axes, and something called a trebuchet, which I am told is a siege weapon that requires an engineering degree to operate." Jake tried very hard not to smile. He failed. "To be fair, sir, a trebuchet would technically be outside the arena's weight limits." Morrison. "Right. Sorry. Serious face." Jake composed himself. "But you have to admit, there's a legitimate point here. We spend so much time training with advanced technology that we forget the fundamentals, tactics, adaptability, creative problem solving. You mean exploiting loopholes. I mean understanding that rules exist for a reason, and the space between rules exists for innovation." Jake leaned forward. "Sir, every single one of my opponents today was better trained than me, better equipped, stronger, faster, more experienced. But they all made the same mistake. Which was, they assumed that modern problems require modern solutions. They saw my crossbow and thought primitive, outdated, useless. They didn't see a weapon. They saw a joke." Jake pulled out his datapad and brought up footage from his matches. "Watch Screeks here, full frontal charge, no tactical assessment. Why? Because his shield cost 50,000 credits, and obviously expensive technology beats cheap wood and metal." Threll watched the footage, his expression unreadable. "Or here, Thraxus. Incredible reflexes. But he was trained to dodge energy weapons, which have charge-up times and targeting lasers. A crossbow bolt just flies. No warning, no electronic signature. His entire combat style was built around technology that didn't apply. Your point being?" "My point is that the galaxy has gotten comfortable. We have amazing technology, and that's great. But we've started thinking that technology is a substitute for tactical thinking. It's not. It's a tool, and tools only work if you understand their limitations." Threll was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled up his own screen. "The championship match, against Kirk, TKKKT. Shh. Boom. Why did you win? Because Grunts made me work for it. He didn't rely on his equipment. He used terrain, patience, and forced me to adapt. That's what made it a real fight." Jake smiled. "He's going to be an incredible soldier, by the way. That guy thinks 3 moves ahead. He requested to be assigned to the same unit as you." Jake blinked. "Really? Really? Along with approximately 30 other students who apparently want to learn what you called the old ways." Threll's expression might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell with Krillian facial structure. "You have started something of a movement, Morrison. The Historical Weapons Club has tripled in membership in the last 4 hours. That's actually kind of awesome. That's a logistical nightmare." Threll pulled up another document. "However, the command staff has reviewed your examination performance. Despite your unorthodox methods, or perhaps because of them, you demonstrated exceptional tactical thinking, adaptability under pressure, and the ability to analyze and exploit enemy weaknesses." Jake sat up straighter. This sounded promising. "Therefore, you are being assigned to Strike Team 7, Special Operations Division. Your commanding officer will be Captain Venn, who specifically requested you after watching the arena footage. Apparently, she appreciates soldiers who think creatively. Sir, thank you. Don't thank me yet. Strike Team 7 specializes in asymmetric warfare, situations where conventional approaches fail. You'll be operating in environments where your tendency to find unconventional solutions will be considered an asset rather than a disciplinary problem." "That sounds perfect. It sounds dangerous. Which brings me to my next point. Threll fixed Jake with all 4 eyes. The rules have been updated. As of today, the following are prohibited in Academy combat examinations: crossbows, longbows, compound bows, recurve bows, slings, atlatls, blowguns, boomerangs, bolas, throwing axes, throwing knives when used with non-electronic propulsion, catapults, trebuchets, ballistae, and any other pre-gunpowder projectile weapon I may have missed. Jake raised his hand slowly. Yes, Morrison? That's a really comprehensive list, sir. Thank you. Just one question, though. Threll's 4th hand returned to his temple. What now? Well, technically speaking, all those weapons you listed use mechanical energy storage and release. Springs, tension, torsion, gravity. All mechanical systems. Jake pulled out his datapad, where he'd definitely not been researching alternatives for the past hour. But there are other pre-gunpowder technologies that work on different principles. Such as? Well, there's the Kusarigama, which is a Japanese chain weapon. Not really projectile-based, more of a ranged melee system. Then there's the Meteor Hammer, which uses centrifugal force. Oh, and war boomerangs, which are self-returning and technically don't use stored energy in the traditional sense since it's all about aerodynamics. Threll stared at him. Also, Jake continued, warming to his theme, there's this thing called a shepherd's sling, different from a regular sling, uses more of a throwing motion than a release mechanism. And technically, throwing rocks really hard doesn't involve any weapon at all, just projectile physics and good aim. Morrison. I'm just saying, sir, that if we're going to write comprehensive rules, we should be thorough. Wouldn't want any confusion. For a long moment, Commander Threll said nothing. Then he reached over and pulled up the regulations database again. His hands started typing, faster than before. New regulation, he muttered. No weapons, devices, or techniques predating the invention of chemical propellant firearms, defined as any weapon system developed before approximately Earth year 1200 CE. Furthermore, no improvised weapons based on historical designs. Furthermore, no exploiting aerodynamic properties of thrown objects. Furthermore, he looked up. Morrison, is there anything else you're planning to weaponize from human history? I mean, the Romans had some interesting things to say about construction equipment that could be repurposed. And the Greeks had this fire system that, out. Sir, get out of my office. Report to Strike Team 7 at 0600 tomorrow. And Morrison? Yes, sir? Threll's expression softened, just slightly. Good work today. You proved that victory doesn't always come from having the best equipment. Sometimes it comes from understanding what your equipment actually does and using it smarter than everyone else. Jake stood and saluted. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. It also means you're now Strike Team 7's problem instead of mine. Captain Venn has my sincere sympathies. Jake grinned and headed for the door. As he reached it, Threll called out one more time. Morrison, out of curiosity, if they ban all pre-gunpowder weapons, what would you use next? Jake paused, thinking. Well, sir, I've been reading about siege tactics. Turns out the Mongols used to catapult diseased animals over castle walls for psychological warfare. Now, I'm not saying I'd do that, but technically biological warfare was banned, not biological intimidation. Maybe some realistic props, some theater skills. Out. Jake left quickly, but not before hearing Threll's voice behind him adding another amendment to the rules database. Outside, the academy hallway was buzzing with activity. Students clustered in groups, discussing the day's matches. Jake spotted Pip hovering near a window, flickering in what looked like excited colors. Jake, you did it. Elite Strike Team. Thanks, Pip, though I think I may have given the commander a stress disorder. Worth it though, right? Absolutely. Zara approached from the other direction, and her expression was complicated. Morrison. That was. I'm not sure what that was. A comprehensive demonstration of why you should never underestimate simplicity? More like a comprehensive demonstration of why humans are absolutely terrifying when they get creative. She paused. I also requested assignment to Strike Team 7. Jake raised his eyebrows. Really? Really? Someone needs to make sure you don't get the entire team killed with your insane ideas. Plus, she added, almost reluctantly, you made me realize I'd been relying too much on my equipment. That's a weakness. I need to fix it. Happy to. Help. Grunts emerged from another corridor, ducking to avoid the ceiling. Morrison, I have acquired catalog access to Earth historical weapons. The selection is extensive. I am particularly interested in what is called a war hammer. It appears to be a human adaptation of my people's traditional weapons. Grunts, buddy, I will absolutely help you with that. The three of them, plus Pip, headed toward the mess hall, already planning their first day with Strike Team 7. Behind them, Commander Threll was probably still updating the rulebook. Somewhere in the historical archives, a clerk was processing an unusual spike in requisitions for pre-modern weaponry. And in his quarters, Jake Morrison pulled up his personal research files. He had folders labeled Atlatl Techniques, Sling Ammunition Optimization, and, somewhat concerningly, improvised medieval siege engines for urban environments. Strike Team 7 had no idea what was coming, but then again, neither did the enemy. And really, wasn't that the whole point? The galaxy had spent millennia developing incredible technology, building weapons that could level cities and shields that could stop armies. They'd created combat systems so advanced that they bordered on art. And then a human showed up with a wooden stick and a piece of string and reminded everyone that sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Commander Threll's final regulation entry, added at 2300 hours and flagged as Morrison Protocol, reads simply: in all combat situations, participants must use weapons and tactics that would be recognizable to someone from the modern spacefaring era. If your grandmother from a pre-spaceflight civilization would understand how it works, you can't use it. The next morning, Jake reported to Strike Team 7 carrying his crossbow, a backup knife, and a datapad full of research on ancient warfare tactics. Captain Venn took one look at him and sighed. "You're the medieval weapons kid." "Yes, ma'am. I watched your examination footage. That was either brilliant or insane." "I'm told it can be both, ma'am." She smiled. It was not a comforting smile. "Good, because we have a mission that requires someone who thinks sideways. There's a pirate stronghold that's impervious to modern weapons. Adaptive shields, sensor nets, the works. We need someone who can think in terms they won't expect." Jake's grin was immediate. "Ma'am, have you ever heard of a siege weapon called a trebuchet?" "No. It's a counterweight-driven catapult that can throw a 90-kilogram projectile 300 meters using nothing but gravity and mechanical advantage." "Morrison, are you telling me you want to build a medieval siege engine?" "I'm saying that sometimes the old ways work, ma'am, and nobody shields against rocks falling from the sky." Captain Venn stared at him for a long moment. Then she started laughing. "Strike Team 7, meet your new tactical specialist. Try to keep him alive. And Morrison, ma'am, whatever you're planning, make it ridiculous. We have a reputation to maintain." "Yes, ma'am." As Jake joined his new team, Grunts gave him a nod of approval. Zara looked resigned to her fate. Pip flickered nervously. And somewhere in the academy, Commander Threll was already updating the regulations database again. The galaxy was in for an interesting time. Humans, after all, were very good at finding loopholes, and they had several thousand years of pre-spaceflight warfare to draw inspiration from. The future was about to get a history lesson.
Maya Chen pushed her food tray along the metal rails, watching the strange colors and shapes of alien meals pass by her eyes. The cafeteria of Zenith Collegiate stretched out like a vast metal forest, filled with tables and chairs of different sizes and shapes. Some tables were low to the ground for species that crawled. Others reached up high for those with long necks or floating abilities. The air smelled like a mixture of flowers, burning metal, and something that reminded Maya of old gym socks. She had been at this school for 3 weeks now. 3 long weeks of sitting alone at her table in the omnivore section. The section was nearly empty most days. Maya had learned that most species who could eat both plants and meat chose to eat plants anyway. They looked at her like she was some kind of monster when she ate her protein bars or the synthetic chicken the food machines made for her. Earth had only joined the galactic community 8 months ago. The government had been so proud to send students to this famous university. Maya had jumped at the chance to study alien biology. She wanted to learn about the thousands of species that lived among the stars, but nobody had told her how lonely it would be. Nobody had warned